States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Note for the record that all council members are present.
Okay. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda?
Move adoption.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Road communications number 1. Dana Dilworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I am here to ask or just mention about the responses to the oil spill in the bay. On Thursday of last week, I went to an assembly hearing in Emeryville put on, for the Natural Resources Committee, and observed what the information was that was being provided to the state regarding the oil spill in terms of somebody had set up a timeline. The Office of Spill Prevention and Response provided maps and pretty much concur, and then listened to the people who were supposed to respond to the action. Long and short of it, there was a lot of finger pointing. There was a lot of people who weren't able to act or chose not to act based on divisions of power. People who were willing and responsive to act were told not to respond. And when I had heard that the oil spill was seen as close as Bayview Hunters Point, I went out and photographed the lagoon. I provided the council with my observations, and initially on the 13th everything looked fine, and the following day there were evidence of animals that had died, but actually probably dismembered by something because there wasn't full birds there, and that the Office of Spill Prevention Response had closed off all the beaches. However, on the 14th, I observed people still fishing in the lagoon, and had also questioned whether we could have done a real quick boom across the opening to our lagoon. I think it's only 2 channels about between 15 and 20 feet wide. And so out of my comments to the state assembly people, I suggested that every community along the bay and the ocean have a singular response, the ability to respond to these issues at the time. I had asked our Public Works Director if we were going to respond to anything, and he told us that containment booms were on order. And our ability to have protected our lagoon was missed by not seizing an opportunity to act sooner. And therefore, I can make my information available to you. It's also probably part of the public record, but I would hope that when we go through these discussions, right now we're dealing with the Kinder Morgan tank farm, we could be the future source of a similar spill. And we are in the process of responding to comments in a remedial action plan on the Kinder Morgan site, and I really think that prevention of spills and containment needs to be part of Kinder Morgan's responsibility. And if that doesn't come through the citizens' comments, I would hope that the City of Brisbane can support the opportunity to be able to respond in a more timely fashion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Terry O'Connell?
Could we get finished, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Because the city has been
pretty proactive, I think, in regards to the spill, and perhaps maybe Randy and Ted would like to comment on it.
It's actually on your agenda tonight.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll wait till the agenda item.
Okay.
Terry?
Hello, Terry O'Connell, 70 Sierra Point Road, Brisbane. I have been approached by several members of the community to ask the council's help with the dog park. With the new construction or the remodel going on at City Hall, the access to dog park has been rerouted to the back side of the building. And for those people walking to the dog park, there are no sidewalks, there are no street lights, there is no light at that end of the park, and people feel unsafe. I think there's a simple help to that, and that would be to move the construction fence over 4 feet to allow access through the normal channels through the front, or a temporary lighting put in at the far end of the dog park so that people do feel safe with going down there. I know that I've been coming through the old front way still because I've almost gotten run over by people taking the corner too quick heading to the dog park if I walk in the street or walk on the sidewalk. I mean, even walking in the grass, it doesn't feel safe. So I'm just asking if you can look into that and see if there's some sort of temporary lighting or access measures.
And the answer as a dog park user is we're going to look into that.
Great.
Thank you. Any other requests for oral communication? Okay, we'll move on to approving the monthly investment report.
Move approval of the monthly investment report. That is report number, phone number.
Is there a second?
I'll second
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. We come to the consent calendar.
So moved.
I would like to remove item C.
I'd like to remove item A.
it. I'd like to remove item D, as in David.
I second Seppi's amended motion for B and E.
Approving items B and E, all in favor?
Aye.
Item A, council minutes for October 15th.
First, on the bottom of page 10, this is about the Bank of America appeal. The motion was carried. It reads 3-2. Councilmember Conway and Barnes opposed. I believe that is actually Councilman Bologoff and Barnes opposed.
Right. That's correct. Amend the minutes accordingly.
And then on page 7, the 4th paragraph is the middle of the page. It begins with City Attorney Topol said the final inspection confirms that the project approved by the city is what was built. I think the subject of the conversation at that point was actually this, something that we're going to discuss again tonight, I think, which is a document that the architect or the designer or the builder would have to sign saying that the project was built according to the plans, which is different, I think, than a final inspection. So I just would like that change made to the text. And with that, I will give you a motion to approve the amended minutes of October 15th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Contrary minded? Thank you. So we have item C is the resolution, and I'd like to make in that resolution the same correction. Or the resolution says there's a 3-2 vote, but doesn't say who voted which way. Let's please note that council members Bologoff and Barnes were the two against.
With that change, I'll give you a motion to approve Resolution 2007-35.
All in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, we did get the second. Oh. Opposed? Item D?
Item D, Mr. Mayor, I'm looking at page 1 of 7, the memorandum of agreement, and it mentions the study area, and the study area is described as 3rd Street and Cargo Way, US 101-280 interchange to Daly City, which is in San Francisco, Balboa Park, Bayview, Silver Terrace, western portion of Hunters Point, Candlestick Point, Visitation Valley, Sunnydale, Crocker, Amazon. That's all in San Francisco. And the neighborhoods in Brisbane and Daly City immediately adjacent to the county line. And I'm just wondering why, with all of this in San Francisco, two things. Number one, why are we having this? And secondly, why are we paying $100,000 and they're paying $100,000 when the bulk of the study's in their area?
Well, I think probably I could take first shot at this, and Public Works Director can then maybe respond also. This is, as you know, the Bi-County Transportation Study has been going on for some number of years now, and it is an effort of the 2 counties and the 3 cities and the various transportation planning agencies within those 2 counties to come up with a coordinated and agreed upon plan with regards to the public infrastructure that will be needed for transportation improvements, most specifically Candlestick Interchange, Geneva Avenue Extension, the potential multimodal station located somewhere out in the Brisbane Baylands. So I think in a lot of ways this is really more of a benefit to Brisbane and the San Mateo County. I think the areas that you're looking at in terms of where they're trying to capture the traffic is where the traffic counts are, and maybe the Public Works Director can respond more to how they do the traffic counts. But this is again a continuation of the study that we did several years ago, as we're getting closer now to potential development both in Baylands as well as on the San Francisco Candlestick and Hunters Point area. We have a need to get the study updated. And then finally, I think the last piece is that this will allow all the jurisdictions to kind of cooperatively move forward in terms of transportation funding dollars. And that may be ultimately the key element of all this. Perhaps Randy would like to speak to just how they go about the transportation numbers in terms of traffic.
Sir, I think the only comment I would add, in addition to the city manager's remarks, was that the study circle, as Clay pointed out, is where you're trying to capture the trips from. But what really drives the dollar amount of the study is the developments themselves, because those are going to be the destinations that trips are coming to. And when you look at the dollar amount that we're paying, the $40,000 out of a total of $200,000 that we're paying, it's fair to say that the amount of development that you're going to be seeing proposed in our area is about 20% of the total development that's being studied. So on that pro rata share basis, you know, the amount of nuisance you're causing, if you will, because that's what traffic is. It's, you know, whether it's coming to you or going away from you, you're adding more of a load to the system. So I think it's fair from that perspective.
Yeah, we're paying $50,000.
Yeah, but
oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. You're right. It's $50,000.
If you go county by county, the bulk of the work is in San Francisco County, and a little bit of it is in the San Mateo County. We're paying equal shares. We're paying $100,000. The whole project costs $200,000. We're each paying $100,000, and I was just curious about that myself.
Yes, sir. And I can't explain why RTA in San Mateo County didn't note that for themselves, because they're the people picking up the remainder of that. Our colleagues in Daly City are picking up a $10,000 share, and then it's the Congestion Management Agency, which is the equivalent of the Transportation Authority in San Francisco down here, that's paying the other $40,000. So they did not object to that when those numbers came up, and I don't know why. So
we're paying the bulk of, well, for San Mateo County, we're paying the most because of the Baylands development.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now,
And I might just add, we're charging this to the redevelopment agency, project area number 2, which is where this, the project area 1 or 2? It's 2. Where the improvements are likely to take place. So it's not a general fund expenditure of the city.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for the, thank you, sir.
We have the citizen that wants to comment on it.
I assume that's Dana?
Thank you again. This study is part of that information that many years ago I saw, but the city for a period of time thought it was confidential information. And I have not read the report, so I apologize if this is already handled in the document. I am concerned that Brisbane will not be heard about the desires of basically being a clean environment and not inviting lots of transportation and fuel burning people to not be a magnet for the diesel trucks that will need to deliver the goods and et cetera. And also the plans that I had seen had shown 5 different cuts across the Baylands, 5 different new streets going across the Baylands. And I'm quite concerned because in a community blog called The Brain, there were many people who do not want Lagoon Way or something parallel to Lagoon Way to cut through the sensitive environment of Icehouse Hill in order to make a direct connection to Guadalupe Canyon Parkway. And those were the things that were considered. That has not been made public, and I think we need to have a discussion as to what the people of Brisbane would want. And I understand that people in Daly City have been considered stakeholders and already had a public meeting, and people in San Francisco have been had a public meeting, and yet we haven't had a public meeting here about this bi-county transportation issue. And so I am concerned that Brisbane's unique features and unique desires for the future are not going to be heeded by this Bi-County Transportation Commission or committee, and would hope that we have adequate representation in the decision on these factors of creating new travel arrangements passing through the Baylands. Thank you.
Thank you. On page 4, Dana, just in case you have the packet that shows that the interagency committee shows that Brisbane does have a seat on that.
1 seat. Thank you.
I give you the motion to approve the draft memorandum of agreement and authorize the city manager to execute the final version on behalf of the city.
Second.
Go ahead.
I have a motion and a second from Seppi. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we'll finish the consent calendar. We'll move on to public hearing on the green building ordinance, continued from October 15th.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you may recall, well, the council considered a draft of the ordinance at your last meeting. It was recommended that the entire matter be continued to this meeting and the ordinance not be introduced because there were some last-minute changes that neither the council nor members of the public had much of an opportunity to review. The changes were mostly related to the subject of core and shell, and in particular core building only, and that was prompted by the pending application for an R&D facility at Sierra Point, which we're told is going to be essentially a core structure having no or very few internal improvements.
A shell
I'm sorry, a shell structure. The ordinance has been revised to basically accommodate a situation having a shell application only. The approach that's been taken is to recognize that even though it may only be a shell, there are certain design factors that still could be taken into account in designing a green building to meet the silver standard. Could be the orientation of the structure and any number of other site improvements. So the approach that's been taken is not to say we defer the whole issue, but essentially to require the applicant to show how many points can be attained at the shell stage, but then to submit a plan showing how the interior improvements will achieve the silver standard. That doesn't mean it can't be modified if, when they go to lease the property, the tenant has other plans and designs, but there still then is the requirement to meet the silver standard, and no building permit would be issued for the interior improvements until green building documentation has been submitted showing that standard has been achieved. Other than that, I'd have to say the ordinance is not terribly different from the draft that was reviewed by the council at the last meeting. There were a couple of questions raised by council members, and some language changes have been made to try to clarify that. On this issue of certification, there is already a provision in the ordinance that requires the architect or the contractor to submit a certification that the building has been constructed in accordance with the plans. So while we do our own inspections, we're also relying upon the developer to submit documentation when the building is completed showing that it has complied with the plans that were initially approved based upon compliance with our green building standard at that time. But other than that, the ordinance is pretty much the same as the draft that was submitted to the council last time. Before acting on the ordinance, there is an amendment to the conservation element of the general plan, and essentially what that amendment does is to set forth all the various circumstances under which the green building standard would be applied, both as to residential and commercial structures, and then those listing of covered projects is carried forward and mirrored in the ordinance itself. So the general plan is intended to establish the policy for requiring these the green building measures as mandatory requirements, and then it's incorporated into the ordinance with the various procedural steps for implementation of that program. So the action by the council tonight would be first to adopt the resolution to amend the conservation element of the general plan, and then to introduce the ordinance with second reading to be done at your next regular business meeting. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Council questions, Happy?
From what I understand, this is not for currently approved permits that has been issued.
No, it would be new construction. The difference as to pending projects, for example, going again to the Sierra Point R&D project, there is an express requirement in that development agreement, or there will be, and they understand that, and they've already looked at drafts, which contain the provision that the project must comply with the green building standard. And because of that, I added a section to the ordinance itself that says even though an application may have been accepted as complete and is being processed, if the requirement to comply with the green building ordinance is set forth in a development agreement, then that project still has to comply even though the processing started before the ordinance was adopted.
Okay, would you mind also help me to get clarification on commercial, anything 10,000 square feet?
Correct.
Residential just talks about 20 units.
20 units, yes.
And the square footage that could be applicable, is that 5,000
Well, we only get into
times?
square footage when you're talking about commercial.
Okay.
Residential, the cutoff as originally proposed by the Open Space and Ecology Commission and also agreed to by the Planning Commission was 20 units. Now, the other situation could be that if you're adding units to an existing project, and with those additional units, you end up having more than 20 in your project, then those new units have to comply. So it was thought 20 was a good compromise number for requiring it as a mandatory thing. Still, anybody can voluntarily implement the green building requirements, but in terms of having it as a mandatory requirement, the cutoff has been 20 units.
And for those who do not know, the effective date for this ordinance would be 30 days?
30 days after the second reading, the passage and adoption.
Thank you.
Yes, I had one question. This goes to the point you raised a little bit earlier about the compliance documentation that has to be signed by the architect or project contractor. Is this something that we do currently with any other project?
Well, not as to green building, but certainly as to other areas. For example, on projects involving geotechnic studies, we would require certifications by the applicant's geologists, even though our own peer review, our own geologist may look at it. We typically require as-built plans to be prepared. So the concept of the architect or the contractor coming back and providing documentation pertaining to the completed project is nothing new, but in this context, it is a certification that the project has been built in accordance with the plans, even though we may have conducted our own inspections. We're not relying on our own inspections, we're relying on the word of a licensed professional who was involved in the preparation or implementation of those plans to certify that the work has been done, in accordance with what we've approved.
So I'm not fully conversant in all the reasons for signing, but it's kind of my impression that with a geologist or an engineering wet stamp, that those we require because it's a professional expertise, and it's, it goes to the competence of the engineer, the geologist, to actually do that sort of calculation that then defines how the house or the structure is built. But in this case, I'm wondering if we're asking for the project architect or contractor to sign saying that it was built in accordance with the green building documentation, and I don't see that we're requiring the project architect or project contractor to be green building experts, whereas we would expect and require an engineer to be an engineering expert with a wet stamp that has meaning, or a geologist to have state certification as a geologist, and his wet stamp would carry the importance of that designation, but we're not requiring that here. And so to me it seems something different. And the only reason I bring it up is if we want to require as-built drawings, and we do that currently, I'm fine with that. But it seems to me just an additional layer of paperwork, if you will, that doesn't carry the same sort of meaning as the wet stamp of an engineer or a geologist calculations on the soil stability, for instance.
Yeah. I guess the only response I could make is that more and more architects are becoming competent, shall we say, in terms of green building. You can go out and go through the process of becoming a certified green building architect, I suppose, or whatever the phrase is. Our ordinance gives the city the ability to require that drawings be prepared on larger projects, but on smaller projects, not necessarily. We may have our own people look at it, but I guess the thought is that we don't really know at this point who is going to be the author of those drawings. It might be someone that has all of those professional qualifications in terms of a formal certification, or it might simply be an architect which we have determined is sufficiently familiar with the green building methods that we're willing to accept their drawings. So you're right, there's nothing here that says the person has to have a special license or certification. And I think the reason is that it's possible that the drawings were initially prepared by someone who didn't go through that process, but nevertheless the city is satisfied that they've submitted documentation that complies with the green building standards. And we will have it reviewed by our own peer review. And Randy, you had a comment.
Yes, sir. I think just one of the other comments I would throw in there to that is that in today's world, you don't have to have an architect's license or civil engineering license to design a home. There are certain calculations, for instance, the structural calculations, which would have to be stamped, but the overall design of the house doesn't have to be done by a licensed architect. So it's conceivable that you could get a set of plans for a new single-family dwelling that even the person preparing those would not have the wet stamp. That professional licensure necessary because it's not required under state law. So if you were to think that that was something we wanted to require as part of this green building ordinance, and that would be an additional burden we'd put on there if we wanted to say that the person had to be appropriately licensed or credentialed in some such way.
And I'm not, sir. You're right. I was using the parallel of the geologist and the engineer as a contrast.
Yes, sir.
To what I see here, and so I kind of like the idea of striking the language of these 2 points on page 14, numbers 1 and 2 at the very top of the page, the compliance documentation, because I mean, or possibly substituting as-built drawings, I mean, which is what we already do for projects of this magnitude, as I understand it. I mean, I'm fine with whatever our current process is. What I'm trying to avoid is making green building more onerous, more difficult for people to do. I mean, it's already going to be a big change. If we can fit it to our current way of doing business, I think that adoption and compliance will follow.
Just to follow up on what Randy was saying, we do have a definition on page 5 of the ordinance, paragraph P, as in Peter, has a definition of green building accredited professional. And that's someone who has been basically certified by LEED or by the Green Point rating system as a certified Green Point rater and the like. But then when you get into the parties who would actually submit the green building documentation, this is the stuff that shows how the project is going to comply, on page 10, up at the top, it says the green building documentation shall be prepared by a green building accredited professional, that's the defined term, and then this is what I had in mind, or other qualified person approved by the green building compliance official. So if somebody comes in with a set of drawings and they don't have a LEED certification, but nevertheless we're satisfied they submitted documentation that complies with the ordinance, we're not requiring, and I guess this is consistent with what you're saying, we're not requiring that the preparer of the green building documentation go through that procedure, which could be fairly long and possibly expensive. They just need to know what they're doing, and that same person could be the one who gives the certification that the project has been built in accordance with the plans. I don't have a problem, however, in simply saying that we're required to get, accurate as-built drawings. And I think the intent here was that whoever was involved in preparing those drawings, whether it's an accredited green building professional or other person satisfactory to the staff, would be the person signing off on that certification. So, either way.
Yeah, I like the idea of as-built drawings myself, since it's something we already do.
So you want to change that, Michael? You have proposed language? Or you want to leave that up to Hal? Or?
At this point, I'd like to leave it up to Hal, because I did not come prepared with alternative language.
And to be specific, the language you're asking Hal to revise is at the top of which page?
14, I believe.
14.1.
Right. So this is 15.80.080 D1 and 2.
So you would eliminate any form of certification, or just say that there has to be as-built submitted?
I mean, I would prefer to be consistent with our current method of ensuring structures are built as the plans indicate. And if that's an as-built drawing set afterwards, that's what I'd like to see. I just don't want to invent some new paperwork system. And I think this also goes to the idea, in your first presentation back on October 15th, you're saying that the idea is that all of this documentation comes in with the application.
Correct.
It's at the beginning of the process. And that I'm very comfortable with, and I like that idea. It seems to me that we're trying to do the same thing at the end of the process in a different way.
Yeah, and the point of the certification is simply as a verification to the city that everything we've looked at the beginning has been built as we've approved it, and there's a certification that when they're all finished, it complies with those plans.
So an as-built, would that do it?
Well, I guess the question would be is how do you follow up? What would be the mechanism that would be able to follow up to say that this actually meets LEED Silver? I mean, it may present an as-built, and all of a sudden there was a lot of change orders in the field that necessarily didn't meet the criteria.
Well, the change order would have to be approved by the city if it would in any way result in a loss of points. There is an ability here to do substitutions and get other credits if you're giving up some, but all of that needs to go through the city approval so we know we're still at the silver rating, or whatever rating is required.
I mean, this is something really I think the field inspectors need to be more cognizant of than anybody, you know, of what's going on, so.
I guess I would kick the ball over to the city engineer and ask if we have a situation where, for example, we have a structural engineer or a geotechnic report, whether we routinely require some certification by that licensed professional that the project has been built in accordance with the plans, or we just get as-built. I mean, in my mind, the difference is whether we're looking at the plans and making a judgment, or we're having the designer give us a certification. We can still look at the plans and make a judgment, but we're having the person who presumably was involved in the preparation of those plans have the obligation and responsibility to sign off on it and let us know that, you know, they've been built in accordance with what was approved.
And the answer to your question is generally yes. And I say generally because what happens is, if the analogy you were trying to draw is from a geotechnical engineer, if he were to go out and do a preliminary geotechnical investigation on a property, he would give those results to a civil engineer or an architect. He would then review the plans afterwards and the calculations that were done and offer a statement as to whether or not those plans had been prepared generally in accordance with his recommendations. And we would require that.
Those are construction drawings before.
Yes, sir. Before they're built. Yes, sir. Before we'd approve them. Correct.
So where does this leave you at the moment?
Well, this leaves me right where I started, because what I understand is that the green building, the approval to build is only granted after the drawings that are submitted for the project pass muster with the city's green building expert as to whether or not that configuration will meet LEED Silver standing.
Correct.
And if it does, then they go ahead and build the project. And then I would say at the end of the project, instead of requiring a new documentation, special documentation just for green building, that we then demand accurate as-builts and rely upon our inspectors and the control of change orders through the building process to ensure that it was built as originally planned.
Right, we'd have to review the document at the end too. Generally, I don't know if they do, you know. I don't know if that's part of the protocol right now, is it? Reviewing it? I mean, it's different from submitting it and reviewing it. They're two different things.
Yes, sir, and some of this is starting to fall under the Planning and Community Development Department area of expertise a lot more than mine. Certainly, if it's the grading that we're reviewing on site, we go out and we examine it to ensure it was built. Building inspection tends to be a little bit different because the building inspectors aren't there for every aspect of every moment of it. They have certain checkpoints and gates where they have to go in and inspect. They've got to go in and inspect the framing at a certain point in time. They go in and inspect the nailing at a certain point in time. But they're not required to make an inspection each and every day. So it's slightly different.
Yeah, right. I realize that.
But I think as a practical matter, if you eliminate paragraph 2, if someone was to submit as-built, or even if they obtained the certification from the architect or project contractor, we would still be taking a look at them. I don't think we would necessarily take that at face value. So whether, and it may not be Randy's department, but whether it's our own green building official or a consultant that we've hired on larger projects as an advisor, we would run it by them just to make sure that everything has been built in accordance with what we approved initially. This is just another verification, if you will, but I guess my assumption would be the city still would review the drawings, either whether it's the as-builts or the certification, to make sure that what we expected has been installed.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see where you're coming from, Michael, on it, but it's just having that check and balance in place that says, okay, it started out on the plans as LEED Silver minimum, right? Mm-hmm. And that we end up at the end of the project at LEED Silver minimum, at least, you know. So I guess, how do we figure that out?
Well, we end up with the measures that we had determined at the drawing, at the planning stage, should result in LEED Silver minimum. As I indicated before, we're not requiring commissioning to show that the building will actually perform as we expect it will. We hope it will, but we're doing the best we can in terms of requiring that these measures be implemented. And at the end of the project, we simply verify that they have been implemented. Once they've been implemented, we simply, hope that the building will perform as we predicted.
Okay. So would this be considered a major change to the ordinance if we have?
No,
to do
I don't
that?
think so.
So we can still just kind of move forward tonight? And
Yeah.
You draft some language?
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that.
Sounds good.
Any other council questions, Si?
I have a couple, yeah. Mr. Mayor. I'm still not clear about the shell. Why would I build a shell and just leave it there? And can a shell be built
Yeah.
using green building? And then why do we exempt it if it can?
Well, we're not really exempting it. The problem with the shell is that a lot of the internal energy-consuming systems are not installed, and I'm told the reason for that is, and it may be a feature unique with R&D, that because of the interior configuration, the space, the systems, the plumbing, heating, electrical systems are designed for that particular use, and you don't always know what that design is going to look like. On an office building, usually you have the elevators in there, and you have the heating and cooling systems, and the plumbing systems, and the restrooms are plumbed out or installed, and space is leased out. Whereas in the R&D, probably because of some of the additional plumbing and electrical facilities, that's really designed based upon the tenant's use of the space. So basically the shell is the exterior structure of the building, but not the energy-using systems that are installed inside. There might be some minimal things as required by the fire department. There might be an access for water for fire prevention, and we have some language to that effect. But the whole interior energy-using systems have not been yet designed and installed. Now, the developer of that project originally suggested that we defer the whole inquiry until the internal systems go in. We felt that there was no reason to do that because there are still some things you can take into account even at the shell stage, the orientation of the building and the like. So what we wanted at a minimum was you've got to submit a plan showing what you're going to require of your tenant. So even though the tenant may be designing the interior energy using systems, the tenant is going to be on notice right from the start that those systems are going to have to comply with our green building standard. And the developer, if the developer is not putting in those systems, is going to have to present us with a plan showing how they propose to satisfy the standard. And then those requirements will be passed on to the tenant. What I wanted to avoid is getting the city involved in the leasing between the developer and the tenant. I just don't want to go there. And we have no contractual relation with the tenant. Our applicant is the owner of the property, and it's going to be their responsibility, if the tenant is installing their own improvements, to make sure the tenant complies with the ordinance, and not the city chasing after a tenant with the owner saying, well, I'm done. It's your responsibility now.
Okay. So tenant improvements are going to have to be green regardless.
Yeah, the tenant improvements, you're not going to get a building permit for the tenant improvements until all of the green building documentation has been submitted at that stage. The other thing is we don't know whether they're going to be tenant improvements or owner improvements. Especially these days, that's a negotiable item. And it could be the owner does the work and gives the tenant an allowance or a rent concession or any number of things. So that was another reason why we wanted to keep it at the owner level, because the owner may in fact be doing the interior improvements based upon tenant specifications. But until that documentation has been submitted showing how the internal systems will achieve the silver standard, no building permit would be issued for any of the interior improvements. That's really our cutoff point here, or our control point, I should say.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for correcting that, getting that single-family dwelling out of that, even though we left it in the other. The other question I had was on page 2, and it says the revised draft.
Page 2 of?
Page 2.
That's of the memorandum from the city attorney. And it says the revised draft also adds the paragraph B to section 1580.040 on page 8, authorizing a green building compliance official to apply new guidelines and standards that may be developed by LEED and Build It Green relating to other types of projects, etc. Does any of if there are certain new standards, does that have to come back before any commission or committee or the council? Or can they arbitrarily change it in the...
Well, it wouldn't be arbitrary. It would have to be consistent with the program
Sure.
established by the ordinance. What I'm thinking, quite frankly, is precisely the core and shell situation. There is a draft that is being kicked around on standards for shell structures, but it has not yet been adopted. So what we had in mind is if something like that is adopted, or there's a variation of a standard that we already have, rather than have to go back every time and amend the ordinance, it gives the green building official some level of flexibility to apply those standards as they evolve, as long as it's consistent with the ordinance that we have. So if there's some major change, then it would have to go back for an amendment of the ordinance, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. On the amendment to the general plan conservation element, page 2, residential project, which is item 3, and it reads, there's new language, so it's read and changed. Constructed pursuant to the same development permit approval, whether single family or multifamily or a combination thereof. Do we really need to put what the last sentence, whether single family, multifamily, or any combination thereof? Or can we just leave that off? Because here we go, we've got that single family again.
Well,
I know what you're
yeah.
saying. I know what you're saying, but you corrected it in front. And I'm just saying, let's be consistent throughout this thing. Because years from now, perhaps when we're all gone and this argument comes up, and guess what? They're going to say, well, if the council didn't mean single-family dwellings, then they should have taken it out of the ordinance. I mean, we've heard that one before, too.
Yeah, I don't have a problem if you wish to delete it. The purpose of adding in that language was to show that we have essentially a subdivision. You could have a subdivision of single-family dwellings, which is why I added in the language constructed pursuant to the same permit or approval. It certainly was not intended to cover isolated individual dwellings,
Okay.
but groups of 20. So if the council is more comfortable with that language deleted, that's fine. It was just in there by way of example anyway.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, Si, but I'm okay with it because the 20 is what really triggers it. And
Yeah,
I'm pretty clear on that.
I get nervous about single-family dwellings because, you know, and when you go to page 5, item 3A, you've got it again, whether single-family or multifamily or any combination thereof. Yeah, it says 20 or more dwelling units.
Can I suggest a word?
Sure.
If we insert the word composed between the word whether and single, so that it would read, a newly constructed residential project having 20 or more dwelling units constructed pursuant to the same development permit or approval, whether composed of single-family or multifamily or any combination thereof.
That ties it up.
Right.
That does tie it up.
Composed of.
Yeah. I can accept that, yeah.
Okay, so we're inserting composed of between whether and single?
Yeah. What else did I have there?
That's both on
Maybe in
page
the
2 and
ordinance as
page
well
5
as-
of the
Yeah,
ordinance.
yeah, both.
Right.
I think that makes sense to me now. Paving detail, this is on page 18, last page. 7, paving details, and 8, existing topography, and that's all current, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's all current, isn't it? In the current, okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that's all I have.
Anyone else on the council have any
I just
further
have a
questions?
follow-up. if I
what?
may. I have a follow-up question from Hal. Suppose a company or an individual gets a permit or gives us the license that this is what the plans are. And we change our standard because it's a changing environment. It's probably silver in 10 years is not going to be as accepted as whatever. So let's say in 10 years we change it. Does the individual that got the certification, is there any requirement that we can have that person to upgrade it to the level, to the ordinance that we have?
I think the same concept would apply, that when someone receives a project approval, then they are required to build in accordance with that approval. But if we later change the rules, they still have the right to complete the project in accordance with the original approval. We can't impose new requirements midstream. In general, now you could have a situation where somebody modifies the project and is seeking some additional approval or some modification of the approval. But in general, what we do is we apply the original standards that were in effect at the time the project was approved, and that's what they're required to meet. So the answer would be no. If we adopt a higher standard, it would apply to new development, but not to approvals that have already been granted, especially if you started construction. Then you've acquired vested rights to continue and complete the project in accordance with the original approval.
I kind of have a feeling this document's going to be revisited quite a few times within the next 10 years.
I believe it will, yes. Yeah. Well, you know, everybody has recognized this is a work in progress. This is our first step. I have to say that even as a first step, we're imposing much more stringent requirements that many other communities have done. A lot of them have said, well, we'll meet standard for our own public projects, but not the private sector, whereas we're imposing a silver standard as a mandatory requirement on the private sector. And I haven't done a survey lately, but at least the last time we looked, there weren't a whole lot of cities doing that at this point, but I think eventually that's going to become the majority.
Other council questions? I have a few. On page 2 of the initial memo, in section 2, there's reference to conditioned space.
Yes.
What is conditioned space?
That's space that has heating or cooling.
HVAC.
On the next page, we talk about the Green Building Compliance Officer. If we had to elect or nominate such an officer today, who would that be?
The planning director, most likely. Director of Community Development.
And on page 4...
excuse me, Mr. Mayor, but that's in paragraph Q of the definitions, and you know, there's nothing magic about that. If you know, that's just how we've defined that position at the moment.
Page 6.
On page 6.
Yes. And we could change that.
Oh, sure.
Again, on the same memo, on page 4, it indicates the new green building regulations will not apply to any application which has been filed with the city and accepted as complete prior to the effective date of the ordinance. So this would apply to anything going on at Sierra Point.
Yeah, the exception is unless there's a requirement to comply with the ordinance contained within a development agreement. And that exception was put into the ordinance specifically for Sierra Point. And we've said to them from day one, we're going to impose this requirement. It is in the draft of the development agreement. Their attorneys have looked at this document. We've made some revisions. So it's been a subject on the table from day one with that group.
Will this ordinance apply to any remaining residential construction at the Northeast Ridge?
No, because that one already had that's an application that was submitted, and there was no new development agreement being put together with that developer.
Okay.
But I have to say that one of the requirements is solar facilities on the units. So the units may comply anyway, whether it's a requirement or not.
That's solar and water heating, right? It's
Yeah.
not solar electricity. Is that an option?
They are going to be installed. Yeah,
The solar water heating.
I believe so.
On page 3 of the ordinance, there's a reference to the Alameda County Waste Management Authority, and later on in the ordinance to using its standards. Why are we picking that?
They were one of the first groups to come up with some green building standards, and it's a set of standards that has been widely circulated, certainly around the Bay Area, and probably broader circulation than that. So it's become almost like a sample that other jurisdictions have incorporated. It also has been vetted in the public quite a bit, so it's kind of a seasoned set of standards.
Actually, we use that in our open space to really, the basis of our study. We were looking at the green building, was one of the documents that we were looking.
Yeah, the Open Space and Ecology Committee had that document when they started this discussion.
Okay, absent further council questions, we'll open the public hearing. I have a request from Terry O'Connell. And this, to be clear, is public hearing on both the resolution and the ordinance, correct?
Yes.
Terry O'Connell, 70 Sierra Point Road. I am concerned about the green building ordinance, that we make sure that we have lighting built into this, the exterior lighting, and the being as green as we can as far as the lighting not reflecting up into the atmosphere and those kind of things. But what I'm really concerned at is, after hearing the response, that the new homes up at the Northeast Ridge wouldn't be subject to this. Their application is not complete. They do not have an environmental impact report that is deemed adequate, and they are trying to change how many homes they build up there and the location of the homes, and that application is not complete, and that should be subject to this ordinance. There is no way we should let them get away with changing their rules midstream and changing their maps and not hold them accountable to the current standards. If we're going to implement this building, green building, which we should, then the Northeast Ridge needs to be held accountable for it. The new development that goes in there, there's 77 homes, or the 108 condominiums, or whatever they build, needs to be built in green standards, or the whole thing is pointless. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you elaborate on your answer about the applicability of the ordinance to the ridge and the timing of their
The application for the modification was complete long ago. I don't even recall the date. I mean, it was submitted, processed. It would have been deemed complete before the EIR process even started. So it's probably measured, if not in years, certainly in months. And that's really what we're talking about. It's not when the project approvals are granted, it's when all the documentation is submitted to process the application. And also, we're dealing there with a modification of an existing project, not a new project. So there are some critical differences there, but that application, like I said, was deemed complete quite some time ago.
The public hearing is continuing. Are there other members of the public who would like to be heard? Please. Name, rank, and serial number, please.
You got it. Kanji Nishijima at 102 Monterey Street, Brisbane. So my question is there anything that the City Council can do to basically reverse what you just said? Can they make a contrary decision so that, in fact, it does require that they revise their environmental impact report and
To make it comply to the green building ordinance,
yes.
you mean?
How would you once more go through the drill for us, please?
Okay. The reason the exception is in there for development agreements is that it allows us to impose a requirement that otherwise might be legally incapable of being imposed. In other words, it's a negotiated item by contract with the developer. It just so happens that on the Sierra Point project, the developer is looking for a general plan amendment and legislative acts, which is enough of an inducement to have the developer agree to comply with the green building ordinance. The normal rule, however, is that once you've accepted an application as complete, you apply the rules in force as of that time. And you don't keep changing the rules on someone after they've spent a lot of time, effort, and money processing an application and preparing an EIR and doing all sorts of other things, only to get down to the last stages and say, oh, never mind, we're going to change all the rules on you. That creates legal issues as well as just fairness issues. And I think we would be legally vulnerable if we took the attitude that just because some people may not like a project, we can change the rules on them after they've complied with those rules and submitted the application in accordance with the rules in force as of the time it was filed.
Talking about a moving target.
Yes.
I just wanted to emphasize, I think the city attorney did mention it, but the council many years ago with this project required solar implemented with the project. So I think in a lot of ways you were out in front of the issue, and that would be any future homes that would be built there, either under the 89 vesting tentative map or any future tentative map, would have the same requirement.
Right. And so we could request them just to do a analyzing where it actually would fall. Or we could do it in-house to see where the current buildings actually fall, right? I mean, on the materials used and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of that information is just right at hand. And it does have solar heating. Has some other features, I know the...
Yeah, we'd have to probably sit down on a staff level and then also converse with the home builder. But I think what you're asking for is are they going to reach silver even if they're not subject to the
right.
to the ordinance?
Right.
And so let us take a stab at trying to put that together, that sort of analysis.
Right, where it would fall.
Yeah.
So.
And just to clarify, when you're dealing with single-family residences, it's kind of a builded green standard. And so, solar heating is one, low-flow toilets and plumbing fixtures are another. And these days, that's almost a marketing advantage anyway. And it may be in a lot of the green building features for single-family dwellings are now being incorporated into the building codes themselves, which happens to be on your agenda tonight. So a lot of that stuff will be kind of self-implementing. We can certainly look at the plans and make an assessment as to whether it would meet the full builded green standard, but my guess would be it would come pretty close to what we've already required.
Yeah, I think it would too, but not to throw more on your plate, it'd be interesting to see where it lands.
So you are throwing it on their plate? You are throwing it on their plate?
Yeah, I just did. No.
Yeah, okay. Si?
Just to clarify, it takes me a while, but anyhow, this project, this ordinance and this conservation amendment basically applies to city project having 5,000 square feet, commercial projects having 10,000 square feet or more, and residential projects having 20 or more dwelling units.
Correct.
That's fine. Thank you. I finally got it.
Seti?
I was just going to say that even though we don't require them, all the construction, all the building industry is heading toward green building and LEED standard anyway.
Well, this ordinance, may I?
Please.
This ordinance does not preclude anyone from building a single-family dwelling and wanting to comply with the green building law.
No.
They're entitled to do that, right?
In fact, the ordinance encourages that.
Encourage it, right.
Is there any other member of the public who wishes to be heard?
Motion to close public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the public hearing is closed. I'd like to consider an adoption resolution for resolution 2007-28.
Give you a motion to adopt.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I moved introduction of ordinance 524.
Second. I was trying to have.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll move on to new business. We see presentation of the Government Accounting Standards Board Statement 45. If none of you are sleepy, sit back.
I was going to say pressure. Hopefully we have it. Okay. Honorable Mayor and Council, I'd like to present the preliminary actuarial finding of GASB 45.
Hang on a sec. Can you be heard in the back?
Oh, darn. Can you hear me now?
No.
No? Can you hear me now? Okay,
I can hear you.
good. I'll start over. Honorable Mayor and Council, I'd like to present the preliminary actuarial findings of GASB 45. And we'll start off with what the definition of GASB 45 is. GASB 45 is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 45, whose official title is the Accounting and Financial Reporting by Employers for Post-Employment Benefits Other Than Pensions. It's otherwise known as OPEB, which is Other Post-Employment Benefits, which is usually health, vision, dental, and/or insurance. GASB 45 was developed to recognize the costs that have been incurred for our retirees and the additional costs of our current employees when they retire. Our implementation date is June 30th, 2008, and what that means is at that time we have to disclose on our financial statements that we do once a year our net OPEB obligation. One of the requirements of GASB 45 was that we had to commission an actuarial study to determine our unfunded liabilities associated with retiree health benefits. We hired the firm of Bartell & Associates to perform our study, and for them to do that, we had to come up with some key assumptions, and the net OPEB obligation is based on those actuarial results. The key assumptions were the employees are hired before July 1st, 2008. It's based on the memorandums of understanding and the required length of service, which is between 10 and 15 years, depending on the MOU. And our OPEB is limited to basic health care benefits and a supplemental stipend for some of the retirees. We also assumed that everyone will be enrolled in Medicare when they reach the age of 65, and that will reduce our healthcare costs. Our data summary is we have 81 active employees. We currently have 25 retirees, and the assumption is that the net OPEB is based on our current medical coverage. In other words, what you have as your medical coverage now is what you will have for your medical coverage as a retiree. The actuarial assumptions it's based on the values as of January 1st, 2007. The payroll increases will be 3.25%. General inflation rate is 3%. Healthcare is trending downwards. The actuary used the CalPERS 1997-2002 experience study for mortality, withdrawal, and disability. Now that really sounds exciting to me. And the estimated retirement age for miscellaneous male employees is approximately 60.3 years. For the miscellaneous female employees is 59.5 years, and for the safety employees is 56.6 years.
Can we ask a question while you're making presentation
Sure.
or wait until later? You mentioned that healthcare is tending downward.
That was that it's over the next 30 years, it will start going down.
You're talking about the quality or the cost?
Probably the quality,
Quality.
They're really talking about the healthcare is going, are you serious?
there's going to be healthcare reform.
The actuary expects the rate of increase to decrease. Right now, it's about 15 to 20% a year is what we're facing. Over the next 10 to 30 years, the actuary assumes it's going to come back closer to inflation, because otherwise everybody's entire budget will all go towards healthcare. So if it doesn't happen due to the quality of healthcare, there'll have to be something that you can't physically pay that much for healthcare. So that's why the rate of increase trends downward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
We also had to come up with some discount rates for calculating what our actuarial obligation will be. We chose 4.25% for pay-as-you-go, because if we stay with pay-as-you-go, the money is left in the general fund, which means that we have it in LAIF, which runs about 4.25%. If we put it into an irrevocable trust, we can calculate it at 7.75%, because that's allowed to be vested in things such as the stock market and other investments that aren't available or legal for LAIF to invest in. Then one of the deliverables of the actuarial study was the annual required contribution, which is composed of the normal cost and the unfunded liability cost. Normal cost is the value of benefits earned during the current year plus a portion of the present value of projected benefits allocated to the current year. And the unfunded liability cost is the amount that we currently owe for the retirees and the current employees to date. So the results of the estimated net OPEB obligation for June 30th, 2008, if we do the pre-funding into an irrevocable trust, our annual required contribution is $529,000. Our out-of-pocket expenses is $529,000, and what we report on the financial statements is a zero liability. If we stay with pay-as-you-go, which is the 4.25% funding, the annual required contribution is $836,000. Our out-of-pocket expenses is $98,000, and what we report on the financial statements is a liability of $738,000. These results assume that the unfunded actuarial liability is amortized as a level percent of payroll over 30 years. So the out-of-pocket will not always stay at $529,000, and the $98,000 does not always stay at $98,000. What is impressive is that if we stay with pay-as-you-go, we will save ourselves, well, we won't save ourselves, but we will have available $431,000 in the next year to use on our current projects. What we've done to limit the cost is we've developed and are developing a medical after retirement account, which is called a MARA, which is a defined contribution account. Employees hired after July 1st of 2008 will only have access to a MARA account. Current employees will be given the option of opting out of the cash stipend for a city contribution of 3%, plus a city match of up to an additional 2%, for a total contribution of 5%. New employees max out at 2.5%. The cafeteria plan limits our implied subsidy. Some items to consider before pre-funding is that not all employees will retire from the city. When health care reform happens, it has the potential of mitigating our entire OPEB obligation. We need to look into potentials for alternative health care programs to bring down the cost of health care. We have to do due diligence on the growing number of trust vehicles that are out there. And in the city of Brisbane, we have the potential for future growth in revenues due to the development of the Baylands. Therefore, staff recommends that we use that $431,000, the current dollars, for current programs, and revisit this issue in 3 to 5 years. Any questions?
Questions? Thank you.
This is just an information thing, right? There's no
Yeah.
action we have to take.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Item 2 of new business is 2 items with respect to the Brisbane Acres. One is a resolution approving a loan from the general fund to the open space fund. And the second is a series of resolutions approving agreements for purchase of property.
Could they be done under one motion?
I don't know the answer to that. Let's hear Mr. Smith's report.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, pursuant to City Council policy to pursue opportunities to locate willing sellers and acquire open space properties within the Brisbane Acres consistent with the open space plan, and to pursue opportunities to find grant funding to leverage the city's resources and the adopted department objective for the Open Space Ecology Department in the fiscal year 07-08 budget. The staff has negotiated purchase agreements with 4 willing sellers of 5 additional parcels in the Brisbane Acres totaling approximately 6.5 acres. There's a map attached to the second staff report that shows the locations of those properties. The purchase agreements are executed subject to final ratification and approval by the City Council, which is what the series of resolutions before you tonight does. If the Council approves those resolutions, that will start the clock running on the escrow and start the time running on the contingencies as well. The other condition of the purchase agreements would be they're subject to final receipt of the grant funds. So if for some reason the city's not able to meet the conditions, or the Coastal Conservancy withdraws the offer of grant funds, or there's not finally approved by the Coastal Conservancy Board, then the City Council is not obligated to, will not be obligated to proceed with the final purchase.
And Fred, what is the status of that application at the moment, the Conservancy money?
Well, the Conservancy staff has basically given us a preliminary approval, subject to final approval by the Coastal Conservancy Board. So.
And they'll wait on that until they have these resolutions from us?
That's right. So a number of steps have to be taken before they will send that to their board. We have to have a binding purchase agreement, so we need to prepare and submit for their review preliminary title reports. An appraisal has to be prepared, and a number of other steps like that to complete the file before they will act on that. So all of that will take a number of months. That will start, getting those steps taken will start, pending this approval tonight. The total purchase price of the parcels is $485,000 plus appraisal and escrow costs, and the grant fund amount would be $243,500, approximately 50% of the acquisition cost. The first item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing a loan from the general fund to the open space fund, which would be repaid from future allocations to the open space fund pursuant to council policy under resolution 99-1. And there is a exhibit that's attached after the resolution that shows the repayment schedule, in addition to the repayment schedule for the current loan that was approved last year to acquire 7 earlier parcels that were acquired in 2006.
Fred, assuming that these purchases go through, how many of the lots in the acres will that put in the city's ownership, or percentage or number? Or
41.
41 out of?
I think the open space,
like 56 or
I think there's 56 parcels within the area defined in the open space plan as top priority for preservation. So this gets us more than 2/3 of the way, I think.
So look at the map.
Anyway.
Council questions?
Good job, Greg.
Good job, Fred.
I'd give you a motion to approve Resolution 2007-34, approving a loan.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion to approve resolutions number 2030, 31, 32, and 33, ratifying and approving the agreements for purchase of real property identified in assessor parcels XXX.
I'll give you a second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
Good job, Fred.
Item C, review request from owner of 8 Joy Avenue to waive certain requirements of the Brisbane Municipal Code with respect to tentative plans to expand the existing residential structure.
Honorable Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, good evening. As indicated in the staff report, the purpose of this is to allow the property owner of 8 Joy to ask the City Council for relief from imposition of certain requirements of the municipal code. The applicant is the owner of a single-family dwelling at the end of Joy Avenue, and its address is 8 Joy. It's approximately 1,400 square feet, and they've turned in proposed plans to increase the size of the residence to 3,000 square feet. So that triggers a number of requirements within the municipal code. They're listed in here. The first one is 1508140, which is our 50% rule, which effectively requires that not only the residence itself, but that access to the residence be brought up to current code. It also triggers section 1701060 Charlie, which requires that principal means of access to the lot be provided by a street, and Joy Avenue right now is currently an ingress-egress easement. That also brings up a section of the code that council enacted within the last year and a half, which was 1224010 Echo, which prohibited private streets. And I'll just read the first sentence of that section of the code to you. The council found that the City Council has concluded that the establishment or continuation of private streets is contrary to the public interest. And just to make things really interesting for the applicant, for the property owner, there's also section 1224010B.1 of the municipal code, which would effectively require the applicant to not only acquire that easement and offer it to the city in fee, but that he would also have to widen it to 28 feet for its full length of approximately 500 feet. So the applicant's been informed of this. We've had a couple of conversations with both him and his architect, and certainly he believes that the imposition of these requirements would be a hardship for him, so he's praying for relief to the council. He's asking that the council consider waiving the requirement for dedication of Joy Avenue as a public road and allow it to remain as an easement. He's also asking that you waive the requirement for widening the roadway to 28 feet for its entire length. However, he has indicated that he's willing to widen the roadway to 28 feet on the west side of Joy Avenue, which would be from its intersection with San Bruno to the first driveway to the apartments that are on the backside. They're the westernmost apartments on 8 Joy Avenue. And he's also indicated that he's willing to take responsibility for signing and striping and ongoing maintenance of the signing and striping of the fire lane on Joy Avenue. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions from the council. The property owner is also here in the audience, so he's also available for your questions.
Sorry.
In the report, it states that on page 2, the third paragraph says, providing a turnaround for emergency equipment pursuant to fire marshal's requirements will also be mandatory should the owner continue with this application.
Yes, sir.
And what is the size of the turnaround, do you know?
I can't quote for you off the top of my head what that is, sir. It's a fire marshal requirement.
I think it was 52 feet.
Yeah.
52
Could
feet.
be. That could
It's
be
coming
right,
up in the next item.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that feasible for them to create a 52-foot turnaround? Not in that area, is it?
Well, actually, sir, I think it is. It just depends on how you do it. There's certainly another undeveloped parcel adjacent to this. It would undoubtedly be to the benefit of that property owner if he were to cooperate with this current applicant as far as sharing some land to create that. That's certainly a deal that would have to be done between two private parties. It is possible for this applicant to do it on his own property, although I think it would be very expensive for him to do it. If he were to do it on the east side of Joy, it would require the construction of a freestanding retaining wall, which would probably make it cost prohibitive.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other questions?
I don't know, what does this do, Randy, as far as like triggering for some of the other private roads as a precedence?
Well, sir, I think that's the devil of the details, isn't it? You know, certainly, first off, I have to say it would be inconsistent with my role as the person who enforces the laws that the council has codified, to recommend that you allow for any restriction of imposition of requirements here, because this is the municipal code and the council's come up with it, and you've imposed in other areas. However, on the other hand, I certainly recognize that this is a hardship for a property owner that's got a single-family residence at the end of the street. It's at the end of a street, and although it was 30 years ago, it was 30 years ago when the city allowed, in this unique case, Joy Avenue Apartments to go in there, and to go in there strictly with an ingress-egress easement. I recognize that, but at the same time, I say, well, I see the dilemma we might have if we tell this applicant, well, we're going to lessen these requirements here because we make a special finding. What do we do with the next applicant that comes in for a residence on Harold or Annis or Margaret or Paul or any of the other private streets and has a similar requirement? I think it would continue to put the council in a very challenging position as you try to just waiver your codes as you went along. I don't know what findings you would have to make to do that.
And of course, we'd never want to be in a difficult position.
No, sir. I'm sure it's the great pay that you all receive for being elected officials that makes you want to come here several nights a month.
Si?
Randy, the Joy Avenue basically has a retaining wall on one side holding it together. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. You're correct. On the east side, that is correct.
So how would he widen it to 28 feet?
To widen it past the apartments, you'd have to widen the wall. Yes, sir.
You're kidding me.
No, sir.
Really?
No, sir.
You can't get any property up above?
No, sir, because what would happen is you would start, as you get down to where the apartments are now, you would be imposing onto the concrete slabs that are the approaches to their garages, those apartments that face east, the lower level ones, the easternmost apartments, the ones closest to the trailer park down below. Or I'm sorry, the mobile home park.
That almost kills the project. I can't imagine anyone spending that much money on it. 28-foot or 52-foot turnaround and a retaining wall on the other side.
To build 200 feet of a retaining wall would be quite expensive, yes, sir.
Order of magnitude, what are we talking about?
It'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay, that's an order of magnitude.
Yeah.
I'm not really prepared to do a waiver on this. I would encourage, I think, the applicant to reduce the size of his project where it doesn't trigger this mechanism.
So,
and that's where because I think we'd be opening up something bigger further down the road than we'd really care to by setting a precedence. And so while I have sympathy for the applicant, certainly when they purchase the property, you got to know some of the things that go on.
Yes, sir. As you can imagine, I do. This is an unusual situation where effectively what's happening is an applicant is appealing the city engineer's decision, and I'm the one writing the staff report and bringing it to you. So I recognize that we're on kind of the cusp of a dilemma here.
Mm-hmm.
Clark, I surely share your opinion too.
One thing, Mr. Mayor.
Si?
Yeah. If the current residence is 1,400 square feet, by how many feet can he increase this residence without triggering all these requirements?
659.
100?
659, sir.
659?
Yes, sir.
So that would give him a building of about 2,000 square feet?
Yes, sir.
And the applicant wishes to make it how large?
Go from 1,400 to 3,000, sir. So to increase it by 1,600 square feet,
So
to nearly double it.
You're talking about essentially adding 1,000 square feet.
Adding 1,600 square
Adding
feet.
1,600 square feet, sir, is what the applicant's proposing.
He wants 16, but he could safely add 600 square feet.
Yes, sir.
Make
That's
it a
true. That's a
2,000
correct
square
statement.
foot,
Go to
and it would not
2,000
trigger all these
yes, sir.
requirements.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to take more questions, or if you'd like to offer the applicant the opportunity to come up.
Further questions? Would the applicant like to be heard?
There's no parking right now at the current.
First of all, name and address.
Mark Jin, 8 Joy. Right now, the building is actually half finished. It's It's not good looking the way it is, and I was not going to have my architect to add it so big, but this when the initial building was built, it was built all the way to the sidewalk. You know, it didn't have any 10 feet setback. So, and there's no garage, no car garage. All we add is, you know, the 2-car garage in there, and just finish off the building and try to make it, you know, more presentable to the neighborhood. But right now, as it is, the building actually looks very, you know, how I say, you know, there's no garage, is unfinished, and I think by, you know, imposing that, you know, the so restricted of, you know, I had to wind up the roll, all the stuff, and that makes that kills the whole project. I mean, that, you know, that will make me feel like, you know, I'm creating all this parking. If you can see on this one, you know, it's like I create all this parking for the apartment buildings, and not only that, by winding up the roll, that will be actually. I already talked to one of my engineers. By winding up on the east side of it, it probably costs about $400,000, and if we had to, you know, make the 52 feet radius on the end, that will actually add another $150,000 to it. So I don't just to impose all this thing in here. I think, you know, it killed the whole project, and I already sitting on the property for 2 years, and we're paying a lot of tax on it, and it's not like I don't have a place to stay, but, you know, I like to, you know, come to, you know, Brisbane, and then, you know, but, you know, we tear the internal part of it because, you know, due to the last resident was in there, so, you know, it's not livable right now.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you very much. Randy, I'm not so good at drawings and all this. What he has proposed to do is to increase what on Joy Avenue? Is it between the road, the entrance road, and the apartments?
Yes, sir. You're talking about the applicant's proposed parking
Yes.
spaces. He would increase. Yes, sir. So if you were, say you were coming up San Bruno Avenue from Bayshore, and as you turn right into Joy Avenue where the apartments are, he's proposing to add 8-foot parking spaces on the left side of the road as you're coming in from that direction. So that would be the
how
west.
many?
Well, it would be for 250 feet, so say 10.
Okay, now what is the, if a fire truck goes in there now, or fire trucks go in there to deal with the, whatever you want to call them, condominiums or the buildings that are there on Joy,
Yes, sir.
how do they turn around now?
That, sir, I do not know. I don't know how or where the engine turns around in there.
I can tell you.
Please.
We had a fire in this building many years ago. We did get the hydrant in front of the apartment building. What we had to do was back up into this open space and then go out that way. We had the fire truck pointed in because that's the way we drove in. We just backed up into this clearing, which is a driveway to the other house, backed up into that, and then went out Joy Avenue.
And Cy, what is your gut feeling about the safety or lack of safety of permitting this residential expansion in fire terms?
In fire terms, it really doesn't make that much difference to us, Mr. Mayor. Not to us, but it should not, because it's just a bigger building sitting on the lot. If you have a fire there, you're just fighting a bigger fire than you would fight normally. So you would still use the same process of getting in and out of there. That's why they're asking for a cul-de-sac, so that you could get the engine and then turn it around and then go back out. But yeah, 52 feet. Trying to get 52 feet in this.
I don't see that in the staff report.
No, I'm just saying that if well, it says providing turnaround for emergency vehicles. It's at the staff informed architect right here. Which it doesn't specify 52 feet, but I know that's,
Right, but it-
that's the rule is 52
Oh, okay,
feet.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't clearly specify that, but if we go by fire department standard, to the best of my memory, that's what it's going to be.
That's what's next on the ordinance 524, it does say that.
I guess it strikes me that permitting this expansion would provide increased parking for all of the folks on Joy. And it would allow the applicant by no means a gigantic expansion of a structure that's already been there a very long time. It just strikes me as a reasonable request. Any further discussion?
Well, I guess I share Clark's stated concerns about this setting a precedent for other areas of town where we have private roads currently that are substandard. And I immediately think of Annis and Harold. And although I do see the benefits here of widening the roadway and providing the parking and the ingress and egress for that stretch, that widening stops at the apartment buildings where I think you probably really need the road widened. Because sometimes I look down there and I think I see cars parked along there. And but to get back to my main point, Annis and Harold are in stretches substandard and have old houses, some of which probably could use a great deal of remodeling. And I wonder if we do this here, if then we're going to be hit with a request to allow a substandard road width for some length upon those private roads. That's my main concern.
How might you address the quote precedential value of this if we were to do it vis-a-vis the others?
Yeah. Before you say, before you say anything else, sometime back, I don't remember how many years now, the Gonzalez, the two brothers living there, the one at the lower end wanted to expand his residence, and he was going to be required to increase the roadway to 20 feet. And that's what really stopped the project. So there is that precedent. How that would affect us being lenient now, I don't know. You know, that just FYI. Yeah.
It is an issue, and I think someone who came along later on Harold or Annis could say, well, you're treating me differently. In effect, you've waived the standard by allowing the exception. So I think, you know, when we've done that before, we've been able to find unique features that apply to the particular request that we've used, maybe with varying degrees of detail, to distinguish that grant of an exception from other situations that might be similar. It's almost like making a variance finding that there are unique circumstances. In this case, you know, perhaps the availability of parking or the turnaround or something like that. But I think if the council is inclined to grant an exception, it would be very helpful, legally certainly, to come up with some set of findings that make this situation somehow distinguishable from Harold and Annis Road.
So is that something we should send to the planning commission, or?
No, the commission doesn't really have the authority to grant this type of an exception. It would have to come to the council anyway.
So staff would take a look at it and see if we can find special findings that would differentiate?
Well, one thing that would just leaps at me that would differentiate this is the proposed improvements would improve parking and access to how many units here on Joy? Many.
Yeah.
32 condominiums.
32.
32 condominiums.
So it would benefit 32 sets of residents and improve parking access at least to those.
I don't think there's 32 condominiums there. I think
Well,
it's
however
12.
many it is.
We can find out.
Multiple.
I think it's 10 or something like that.
It just strikes me that that a crafty lawyer might find inherent differences between this project and anything on Annis or Herald, which don't have such concentrated development immediately next to the proposed. You're smiling.
No, actually, that's certainly what if I was to prepare a resolution, that would be paragraph 1, as a distinguishing factor. Still up to the council, but yeah, that is a situation that, does not apply to Harold or Joy.
Are there further questions or comments?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Name?
Dana Dilworth, thank you. A long-time resident of Brisbane, not J.C. Burr, had told me that that house was not constructed in the proper location that it was intended to, and that the road was supposed to go through there rather than have the house be the dead end of the road. And that is something that's been told to me. I don't know if that is part of any documentation that you have, but by allowing this condition, if it does indeed exist, to remain and be continued as an obstruction to creating any further movement or any further direction of that street, and or its ability to connect to the proposed Ing project, I find it difficult to say that allowing that house to be a dead end when there's still undeveloped property to its north is could be an issue. And since it doesn't seem to fit the mold as it is, I think you should give it greater consideration about it continuing to be a dead end. Thank you.
Again, for the
Martin
record,
A.
your name and address.
Well, this,
Again, please.
Mark Jin, A. Joy. She said there's there's more undeveloped land on the north side. There's no more undeveloped land on the north side. All those belong to the city. There's one empty lot is dedicated to the butterfly, and then on the west side is belong to one gentleman that I know, and he wanted to develop it, but his road had to come up from the top or have to share to the easement. So there's no more north. I don't think any more property besides mine and my property. There's no more land to be developed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we ready to act?
No. I'm not. I still have to get clear. One, is the emergency access or the emergency turnaround going to be implemented within this project if we say, okay, if you can find special findings and you widen the road and provide X number of parking spaces?
The fire marshal's not here this evening, sir, but I am not aware of any reason why he would waiver that requirement. So he would either require as you're telling me from a future agenda item, a 52-foot radius, or he would require a hammerhead turnaround or some other approved means of getting a piece of apparatus turned around at the end of the Joy Avenue cul-de-sac.
Mm-hmm. And the reason, the reason I'm asking that is where the property lines fall within this project, because, looking at this map, the open space map,
Sure.
the way the lines are drawn, that it looks like if you did a cul-de-sac turnaround there, that it would fall within 2 parcels,
Yes, sir.
not the one.
Yes, sir. I think you're right. And I think the applicant's aware of that.
Okay. And so they would have to get easement grants and all that, or?
Yes, sir. And I think I alluded to that earlier, because what I was saying is that as the gentleman indicated, it would certainly benefit the owner of that undeveloped parcel right now if they could somehow find some terms that the 2 parties are willing to agree to, because then that gentleman's only burden would be to latch himself onto that ingress-egress easement. He would already have the fire department turnaround approved and such. If he could access his property legally from Joy Avenue, it would be a relatively straight matter for him to develop that property as well. So I would think that 2 amenable, willing parties could find a way to satisfy that.
That triggers another question in regards to this. Is by doing that, then wouldn't that property owner on the uphill portion, I guess you would call it, looking at it, be required to pay his portion to this gentleman if it went forward to widen that road?
We typically enter into reimbursement agreements with property owners when they're required to make public improvements at their request. But that's certainly a conceivable outcome. Yes, sir.
Yeah, because if you start adding more back there, then what would be enacted then now becomes more problematic in front of the apartments as far as the width of the road, because now you're adding another house or 2 houses, traffic, etc.
The traffic would get worse, sir, but I think what would happen is that we'd be not struggling. I think we can maintain a 20-foot fire lane there if it's properly signed and striped.
Okay.
In a reimbursement agreement, it would be applicable also on a private street such as this?
I'm sure a clever attorney could find a way to do that, sir.
Yeah, we've used them typically on public improvements, but again, it's our agreement with the applicant that if someone comes in to develop, that we would agree to collect a certain amount representing that applicant's share of the work. And there's no reason why it couldn't be applied to private as well as public improvements.
I'm sorry. What's not clear here is how much property can be developed. Can his neighbor put another house there and another house and another house?
2. Right.
2.
It's R1 20,000, right?
No, it's just one here, isn't it? There's only one house here, isn't it?
Well, if you look at the parcel map here, that effectively, if this is 1 acre, it's R1 20,000, he can put 2 houses, right? No, R1 20,000?
With the transfer of development rights, you can put as many as 1 house per 5,000 square feet.
Right. And then that would apply to this one here also. So.
That's what I mean. That's what's not clear here.
Right.
As far as the...
It is acres.
Yeah, as far as that 52, as far as that turnaround goes, that's the law of the fire. That's the law the fire marshal lives by. It's not something I can tell you that this from experience, that it's not something I would mandate. Especially with this hillside here, I'd be very concerned about digging out the hillside and putting a retaining wall, and then just so a fire truck could turn around. When in fact, in practice, we have gone into that area and we have got successfully got out of there without a lot of problems. So.
Yes, sir, you're right. I'm not aware of any apparatus that are presently stuck in any of our streets. I mean, we've managed to, and I'm trying to make we've got them all out. And we've been getting them out for 40 years, ever since we've been a city. But I think that the questions the council are trying to struggle with is, how do you take existing substandard conditions and continue to move forward? And this is in many ways, although it's significant orders of magnitude greater because of the dollar amounts involved, it's very analogous to situations we struggle with every day, where one person will want to change their driveway entrance, and we'll say, well, you know, the municipal code says it's 12-foot to 18-foot wide width, and you get one per parcel, and that's it. And they'll look at their neighbors 2 down and say, well, for Christ's sakes, his is 30 feet wide, and he's got the whole front of his parcel done, and how come you can't let me do that? Well, we're trying to get to the new code. We're trying to get to the new standards, and that was built 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think that's really the issue we're struggling with here, and with the sense that, you know, does this feel right? What it is that, and when I say does this feel right, I mean, is what we're asking this applicant to do at this point in time, does it feel right? Does it feel fair? Does it seem reasonable? Does it benefit the city to do it? Versus the value of possibly wavering or making finding that the imposition of your municipal codes would not serve the benefit that the council originally intended to derive when those municipal code sections were put into place.
Further questions or discussion?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard everything that we've discussed so far, and I'm not really comfortable with it, you know. And, certainly I would be amenable to taking a look at what staff comes up with, but that doesn't mean that
Doesn't mean you say aye.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, just to move this forward.
One question, Mr. Mayor. And I'm trying to think of, historically, I thought there was another application years ago for another house further down from this house on the curb. And it, obviously, because of the cost of building that thing and the roads, etc., it never moved. But is that possible? Yeah, that's the thing I'm concerned about.
You mean beyond HOA?
Barnes made a case for it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Well,
sure.
sir, and I haven't analyzed this from a zoning perspective other than in a very casual fashion, but I believe that you are all correct in your initial analysis that both of these parcels out here could eventually have 2 dwellings on them. I think that would be generally in compliance with our zoning, and that there would be a way to make that happen. So that is certainly, I think, a valid item for you to consider as well, because you're not just considering one home here, you're considering one home plus maybe 3 more.
But
Or more.
following that train of thought, then,
Sure.
the fact is this house exists, correct?
Yes, sir.
So whether he can add 600 feet
Yes, sir.
legally and expand it to 2,000 square feet or whatever that amounts to, or we allow him to add another 1,000 above that to give him 3,000 square feet.
Yes, sir.
You know,
And I think the point you're getting to is a very good point, sir, is it because the applicant's only choice is not build a 3,000 square foot home or not.
Right.
The applicant's choice is also to build a home that stays within the requirements of the municipal code as far as increasing the size, so that it doesn't go beyond 2,000 and whatever square feet, and he can add 600 square feet to the home and not have to face any of these requirements. That's certainly an option that's available to him.
thank you.
Yeah, I think there's
like to
quite a
make
few
a-
options available too. I'm talking with other property owners and stuff like that, you know, I mean, especially within the acres and the condominium. I'm assuming they have a homeowners association and stuff like that, you know, they would be benefited most, and from the excess parking point of view that you'd provide if this was passed. So, and the person with the adjacent parcel would also be provided a benefit in a sense.
Sir.
I mean, if this was approved, I'm saying as what we're discussing, but I think the property owner would encourage probably conversation with the adjacent property owner and also the homeowners association with the condominium about this whole thing is to make it conforming.
So.
Seppi?
Yes, I'm not comfortable because I do think once you open the gate, it's going to be really hard to deny it to other people. So based on that, I'm ready to make a motion to deny the request.
Is there a second to Seppi's motion? then I will make a motion to ask staff to prepare findings for us to consider at a subsequent meeting, granting the applicant the ability to further develop. And I might, that's the motion I'm making. I have a side comment. I'd like staff to think about perhaps adding a condition that applicant's lot would be subject only to one residence and not to a second.
I was about to suggest that we would include a use restriction agreement as consideration for granting the waiver.
Is there a second to my motion?
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
On the question then, all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
No.
Did I hear a vote?
No.
3-2. In favor. Exercise the prerogative of chair and declare a break. Let's try to keep it to about 5. adoption of uniform codes. And one of them is ordinance 226, and one is ordinance 224, adopting the 2007 Uniform Building Code and the 2007 Uniform Fire Code. Hal,
I'll take it. There are two ordinances because the fire code adoption, the changes there were worked out pretty much through North County Fire. So just to keep them separate, there are two separate ordinances. One to adopt all of the other uniform codes, that'd be like the building code, the administrative code, electrical code, mechanical code, plumbing, energy, historical, and housing, some others. They're all listed on page 3 of Ordinance 526. This is one of these things where if you do nothing, you get it anyway, because under state law, unless you've adopted some local modifications effective as of the first of the year, the uniform codes automatically take effect. And if you actually went and looked in the city's Muni Code, you'll find that we really hadn't done this for a number of versions, and some of the sections go back as far as 1978. So we have not in the past adopted local modifications or even bothered to adopt the uniform codes. We're doing in this case just to update our Muni Code and to put all of the sections in one place. North County Fire did have a couple of revisions to the fire code, but most of those actually are revisions that were already there. We do have some enhanced requirements for sprinklers. Basically, I think the rule is new construction is required to be sprinklered, and as a practical matter, that's a requirement they've been imposing anyway, so in that sense, it's not anything new. You'll find that there are findings in both ordinances, and the reason for that is that both the fire code and the building code contain identical sections pertaining to sprinkler systems. And because we are modifying the uniform code requirements, we have the same findings as the first section in both ordinances, and they're basically relating to the physical and topographical characteristics of Brisbane, the narrow streets, the difficult access, the adjacency to wildland areas and the like, which create special fire hazards, and because of that we're requiring some additional sprinkler requirements. But other than that, I don't have anything to add unless council has some questions. I would have to say if you have questions pertaining to the fire code, I would have to defer to Steve, who's not here. He's out of town today, but we could either defer action or have him here to answer questions at the second reading.
questions?
Yes, I have one on the fire, but I don't, it's not actually pertaining directly to fire operations. This is on page 4, I'm sorry, of the Fire Prevention Code. This is 1540880A2. It says for all R3 occupancies, any new single-family or duplex structure, in R3, can you have higher density than duplex?
I think it's referring to R3 in the building code classification, which is single family. Am I correct on that, Randy? R3 is not the zoning category, it's the building code category.
Oh, okay.
Can we put a
which is residential, essentially.
Yeah. Can we put a differentiation in there?
Yeah, that's confusing.
I think it's kind of confusing.
It is, because, and it's even confusing to me, and I've worked with the codes for a while. I think R1 and 2, it used to be R1 was single family, and R2 and R3, but then they went, I don't know what they did with it, but R3, as I understand it, is a single family.
Yes, it
dwelling.
is.
It is.
Yeah, it is confusing because the building code has different occupancy categories, and they do not track the zoning ordinance.
How about a glossary of terms?
I think that would help.
Well, there probably is at the beginning. I mean, what we could do is give you the definitions.
Yeah.
Those sections are not being amended, so they're not in here, but there is a definition of the various categories.
So
we'll have more clarity on that at the second reading?
or maybe also include building code R3 occupancies or something that differentiates it from the zoning, because that's where I got tripped up.
Yeah.
And let me see if I had another one. Got a dog here. Oh, and this may just be a misunderstanding on my part. On the ordinance on the adoption of the uniform building codes, on page 3 of that, it lists through all the uniform codes.
Yes.
Under each subheading, it says part, which I think is a part of the uniform building code. Is that correct? I'm just looking at the numbers. It says part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, and then part 6.
Yeah, it's the part of the administrative regulations under state law.
Okay, so part 7 and part 11 that are not here are intentionally omitted from this. Okay.
And Doug Ryder is the person who put this together, and he's basically our building inspector.
Okay. And then on the next page, page 4, this is 15.04.060 A2, no, A3, limitations of authority, the Board of Appeals. Who is our Board of Appeals? Is that the Planning Commission?
I believe so, yes.
Is that for certain? I'm
trying to, what section were you in?
15.04.060 B3.
Oh, B3, okay.
So this is on page 4.
I believe it is the council, actually, because the first level of appeals would be to me, and the second appeal of my action would be to you.
Did we put it accordingly? I think this is probably written for...
We can reference it back, because under the municipal code, I'm a building official.
Okay. So this is probably taken, the language, is this taken from
right.
The fire, like general, like for fire districts and everything like that, and so there's...
Well, the Board of Appeals is a term that was again defined in the building code, and I think Clay is right, it would be the city council.
Yeah, so maybe we should apply that to, or at least use that terminology in our code.
So maybe we'll change the Board of Appeals to the City Council?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Those are all the questions I had.
Other questions or comments?
We had just a quick one. Randy, we had a calamity clause in the building code. What happened to that, and how does it apply to these?
Mr. Mayor?
Sorry, I think I'm going to let the city manager take that easy.
I'd like to get the city engineer off the hook here. He's not really the one that's responsible for either the building code or the fire code. The building code is administered by our community development director, and of course the fire code is by the fire department.
I understand that, but in certain cases he can waive certain requirements.
But he's not the person.
Yeah.
I thought he was the fall guy for tonight.
He apparently is. I thought it was just because he was a responsible-looking guy over there.
You know, it's
Either Steve or Bill are
it's
here.
It's difficult to deal with the fire code and then the building code when you don't have either official here.
Yeah,
that's
okay. We'll make sure that they're both here on your next reading and see if we can get somebody from CSG who, as you know, administers the building code for us.
Because one of the questions I'd like answered also is, and I don't know if the city engineer can, I don't want to put you on the spot. You talk about all buildings shall be sprinkled, basically, that's what they're driving at. Now, in the past, that required a 1-inch meter. Are we suggesting that every house that's going to be sprinkled requires a 1-inch meter?
Yeah, that's a question that the fire department really should.
Yeah, you have to, because boy, that could be a terrific imposition.
Actually, sir, you're right. It is going to require, in most cases, the addition of sprinklers is going to require an upsizing of the lateral.
Yeah, 1-inch meter, yeah. I would like an answer to that. I don't know who the expert is on these.
It's actually already written in our standard procedures for infill, sir, that because the way the laterals are sized are based on the maximum possible flow through the lateral, and I don't want to bore you with the engineering details. We've already had GASB 45. I'm so sorry, Betsy. No. It's just unusual that an engineer gets to say somebody else's presentation was boring, sir. That's just, I
To
never
make
did
it
that.
simple, these are calculated system and not scheduled system.
Right. And what happens, though, is that if you have a situation where you've got, whether it be the potable water supply, the fire sprinkler supply, the landscaping, if you've got all of that drawing at the same time from the corporation stop at your main, we've calculated on a number of occasions it actually reaches a velocity where it is possible to peel the cement mortar lining off of ductile iron pipe because it's going through there so fast. So we're imposing meter and lateral sizing requirements to avoid that.
Move introduction of ordinance 525 and 526.
Second.
I'll second it as amended and some of the proposed language to be put in for, what would you say, definitions?
Clarity. And
Subject to clarification.
Yeah.
Correct.
Now, this doesn't have to go through a normal public hearing because it's going to be automatic anyway, right? Is that what you said at the beginning?
It's not a public hearing, but you can certainly take public comment just as an agenda item.
Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to be heard on these subjects of great interest? Hearing none, did I hear a...
We have one.
Now, this is on this ordinance, Robert.
Yeah, it is. Robert Howard, 614 Calippi Court. Currently, with the fire sprinkler systems, they're allowed to use plastic pipe. And I was just wondering if that was still in the new ordinance or not, because certain rodents love to chew through that pipe and have caused problems around town where people have had floods from the plastic pipe. So you might want to consider the issue of the plastic pipes in the fire sprinkler systems. And either if it is in there, a way of preventing rodents getting access to the pipes or substituting some other material.
That would be a question that the fire department.
Fire department will handle.
Good idea.
Thank you.
And you come back on calamity clause?
Robert.
Thank you. Oh, you had a motion seconded?
I believe I had a motion and did I have a second? Yes. Yes. On the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We move on to City Manager's report on upcoming activities, Northeast Ridge update - eucalyptus.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a couple introductory remarks and then we'll get to the PowerPoint presentation. As you probably recall, back in October, some citizens came forward to your council meeting to discuss the site activity permit that had been issued by San Mateo County as the Habitat Conservation Plan Manager for removal of eucalyptus trees in the Northeast Ridge area. That permit was issued back in October by the county. The council asked that staff come back and provide a informational item with regards to that, and that's what we're here tonight to do. Because we're here on this evening to do that, I had asked Brookfield Homes, who is the landowner, if they would hold off on actually implementing their permit until after we had this informational item here tonight, and they agreed to do so. They are set to start work tomorrow. We can start looking at the PowerPoint here, just to give us all kind of orient us in terms of where the site is. The eucalyptus trees are there on the right-hand side of the homes that are built in the Landmark and Altamar area. And as you can see from this diagram, the eucalyptus trees really provide a barrier for the access of butterflies up to various parts of the Northeast Ridge and to the more to the area that we've commonly referred to as Calippi Hill. So that was certainly the origins and the genesis behind the idea of the removal and thinning of the eucalyptus trees. One of the things that I've heard from talking with a number of residents, particularly in the Northeast Ridge, is why are we doing this now, or why is this happening now? So I thought it would be useful just for all of our purpose to kind of go through the history of the project and why we're at this point in time and why things have happened in the speed that they have happened. As you recall, in 1982, the original project was approved both in the city and the county for about 1,250 units. When I say approved, it was a tentative map that was approved. In 1983, I think you may recall that the Crocker Park in the Northeast Ridge was actually annexed into the city of Brisbane. Sometime after 1983, there was a lawsuit that started a process that led ultimately to the 1989 vested tentative map, which also encompassed the eucalyptus removal plan as one of the conditions. One of the conditions of approval were adopted as part of that court settlement. If I jump ahead a little bit beyond the 1989 to 95 bullet point, but to the 1990s, city approved the equivalent exchange amendment, and that was really the document that allowed for the project, the additional open space that was approved with the 89 project to be put into public domain and to create it as open space. If you indulge me for a second, I'd like to just kind of read directly from the staff report because I think it kind of lays out in a very succinct way the history here. In 1989-90, the City of Brisbane approved an application to modify the 1982 approved tentative map of for a 1,250 unit project on the Northeast Ridge to one that would reduce the density to 579 units. The modification was approved in 1990 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and received concurrence from the California Department of Fish and Game by granting the equivalent exchange amendment to the Habitat Conservation Plan for providing for a change of development areas from the 1982 project. Specific obligations regarding thinning and removal of eucalyptus trees were included in the city conditions of approval for the project, again in 1989. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the county, as set forth in the operating program for the Habitat Conservation Plan for the Northeast Ridge Administrative Parcel, also included these conditions for the eucalyptus removal and thinning. The Habitat Conservation Operating Program included rigorous obligations on both the property owner and the HCP plant operator to thin the eucalyptus grows in the Northeast Ridge to increase the corridors for both the mission blue and Calliope silver spot butterflies. So that was the purpose, was to create a better pathway for the butterflies. The city's conditions required the thinning and removal required by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to be undertaken in accordance with professional standards and to be tied to the phasing of the project. And that was a key element, and that's why so many years later we're now dealing with this issue. I think if anybody in 1989 or 1990 would have contemplated that we would be here in 2007 still wrestling with the issue of the phasing and the ultimate build out of this project, they probably would have thought of some sort of strategy to do the eucalyptus removal in this area many years before. No one would have anticipated it would have taken this long to get to this point. I'd like to maybe just go through a little bit of the reasons. As you know, in 1989 we had the Loma Prieta earthquake, and in the early 90s we had a severe recession in the housing market in the Bay Area, probably even more severe than what we're currently experiencing. Around somewhere in the mid-90s, Brookfield Homes bought out Southwest Diversified, who was the owner of the project in 1989. And the first grading permit wasn't issued until 1995. In 1997, the Calliope butterfly was added to the endangered species list. Question would be, what did that do to create this delay? Starting around 1999, perhaps even as early as 1998, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as required in the HCP plan, started consultations with the city and Brookfield about preserving the more precious habitat on the mountain, the area that we commonly refer to as Calippi Hill. So that discussions went back as far as 1999 or 2000. And that was just the commencement of that discussion. In 1999, Brookfield built their Unit 1. Under the city's conditions, we required that they build out in phases for very obvious reasons. You don't want the entire project under construction at one time for everything from dust control to just management of and oversight of the project. In 2005, they built out Unit 1 Phase 2. And then this year, Brookfield Homes has moved forward to request the site activity permit to remove the eucalyptus trees. Now that the many years of consultation with the service and with the city with regards to a revised project have taken place. In your packet, you will have a letter from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service with regards to this particular site activity permit, and you have a copy of the site activity permit that was issued by San Mateo County. This picture up here shows you the 1989 vesting tentative map boundaries. That's in what is in red. That's a little hard to see on the screen, but the red area is the outline of the vesting tentative map from 1989 and really provides the boundaries for the eucalyptus removal that's happening now. Although it's important to note that some of the thinning actually takes place in areas that are just slightly beyond where the housing project would take place.
60 units?
That is what would be the remainder of the project, which at this point would be 43 units.
43.
Okay. It's important to note, and I think this is probably a little bit maybe confusing for all of us, but the purpose of the eucalyptus removal and thinning has more to do with the butterfly habitat issues and the HCP operations and management than it does with the homes. Even if no additional home were ever to be built there, this eucalyptus removal and thinning would need to take place under the HCP operating plan and under the approvals you made in 1989. The role of the various agencies. The United States Fish and Wildlife Services, their primary role is to ensure all activity on the site is in conformance with the adopted Habitat Conservation Plan. The Habitat Conservation Plan manager, which is San Mateo County, issues the site activity permit and makes sure that it's in conformance with the HCP. And the City of Brisbane placed conditions on the project to meet the city's goals and objectives. The city's goal, going back to 1989 again in terms of the conditions of approval with regards to this aspect of it, was to provide a more sustainable habitat for the existing butterflies, and that was the purpose of the removal and the thinning of the trees. With that said, I'll be able to answer any questions. I know I've been talking to several members of the community, so I'm sure people want to input to the council. But I would remind everyone that this is an informational item, that the city's permits were granted with the 1989 approval, and as you've seen in the packet of material, they have a site activity permit from San Mateo County.
Any council questions? Stephanie?
One of the questions that came before me was how long is a permit good for? For example, some cities, when they issue a permit, it's only for that year.
Which permit are you talking about?
For Brookfield Home to build the homes
You're talking
in
about
1989.
Well, again, the homes are a different issue than the site activity permit for the eucalyptus removal. My understanding, the city attorney can respond to this better than I can, but they have a legally binding vesting tentative map that is currently legally enforced. And they have, even though we go back to 1989, when it was originally approved, that still is legally in place. And I think if you look at it let's look at the facts. In 1997, the Calliope was added to the endangered species list. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as they were required, started the consultation with the property owner and with the city of Brisbane. So there have been reasons why, and good reasons why, the project has not been built up to this point in time.
Thank you.
I have a question. And this is in regards to the tree removal then and the thinning. So I guess Brookfield is going to start tomorrow.
Correct.
We're now
That's my understanding.
Considered to be in raining season, right? And, what measures are going to take place from erosion, or how much, the trees that are going to be removed, are they going to be, the stumps going to be ground down?
I do know that they have, there is a couple of different documents, and I can make them available to you. There's a eucalyptus management handbook that goes back to the 1988.
Okay.
There's also an erosion control plan that they have with regards to this permit. And I understand the desire for the part of our citizens, for us to stay on top of this, and to that end, we will have an inspector out there on site. I'm not saying they're going to be there constantly, but they will be inspecting this activity.
Yeah, I would be concerned about, doing it during rainy season, because, the roads are dirt roads that goes up through there that connects to Carter, or what would be Carter, or, potentially would connect to Guadalupe Highway. And that would be pretty much probably the access road that I would suspect on doing that. And so, as you cut the trees, you get more water into that area, and then you're going to get a lot more mud and everything like that. And so, anyway, I just be real cautious
I think
about
they
that.
probably share your concern in the sense that they want to get going on this.
Yeah.
And they've only really waited this long because I asked them to.
Yeah.
Other council questions?
I have one.
Sorry?
Mr. Mayor, I'm looking at this picture, and it shows 43 units. Wasn't the final figure, what's left to be built, 79 units? Is that it, or is that part
No,
of that was already built? And
There was 60 units in this phase, 17 of which you've already approved,
right,
and then there's 43 additional units.
is that the end of this project?
Well, it's the end of the 1989 approvals.
Okay.
Early next year, you will be having hearings with regards to the 2007 amendment.
Okay.
But that's really not on the table tonight, because
I understand that, yeah.
This is per the 1989 approvals.
And that's how they're cutting and trimming and everything is per to the 1989.
Yes.
No more, no less.
No more, no less. There is no other approvals.
All right, okay.
Now, perhaps city attorney, or I was informed that, and I don't know if it's in the property owner's contract or in the CCNR's, that once this project is built out and Brookfield Homes can take off, and we're going to be stuck with maintaining all of these dwelling units.
The dwelling units are sold to individual property owners who are responsible for maintaining them. There are common areas that would be maintained by the homeowners association, and there is dedicated open space that will be conveyed to the county and then the county will be responsible for the maintenance of the open space area using funding provided by this project. So as far as the city is concerned, no, we're maintaining the public streets that run through the project that we acquire after they've been built, accepted, and gone through the warranty period, and it's our normal procedure. So I'm not sure I understand the comment. We certainly are not maintaining private homes.
Thank you.
Any other council questions? I have a request to speak from Roshan Izadi. And you can give us your address.
Yes. Good evening. I'm Roshan Izadi, and I live at 633 Calliope Court. I've lived there for 8 years now. I bought 2 condos from Brookfield, and at the time I bought it, we were told that there won't be any more homes except for the 36 or 39 single-family homes that they were in the process of being built. And we were told that there will not be, those hills never going to be built. I was blown away this year, in the last 2-3 months, going through the planning committee meetings to find out that there is such a huge plan to build so many homes, and now it's reduced to so many. Frankly, I was devastated because I bought my condos because I fell in love with this town 8 years ago when I came through it. And I love with the surrounding and the nature and the beauty that this town offers. It's so unique. So I bought one unit, and then I bought another one, put every penny that I have into it. And so knowing that Brookfield is going to build another so many homes and destroy those hills was totally devastating. And I'm wondering, I'm a realtor, and I deal with a small developer that buy property and go through the city to get permit to build. In fact, I'm dealing with one in Belmont that the owner got permit a year ago, and he only had 1 year to build, and I have this approval. We're trying to sell that property right now, and it's hard to sell because he's basically lost his approval. He had only 1 year. And why in the world Brookfield has this tentative map from 1989 or 1990 that nobody was living there, and now they can go ahead for whatever reason is. Of course the market was bad, of course so many reasons, which is to their benefit. But what about us, little residents that bought into this project and live in here, to have to go through the major construction? They already dug out a huge section. It's not for 6 homes. It looks like for a lot more home. If you go up on Guadalupe and look down, it's huge. And we've been dealing with that. We live there. We have to, on a daily basis, deal with dust, noise, so many other risk issues that was brought up on those meetings, and that's why the committee voted against the proposed plan, which is not on the table tonight. I understand. But why would they wait from 1989 until 2007 to take care of the butterfly, to thin the trees or cut the trees? Why not sooner? Why now? It's clear that they are thinking of themselves. They're going to build those homes. They're moving forward. They're moving forward regardless of the cries we're doing, you know, the little residents living up there, or the rest of the town who love this town passionately. I've come to know a lot of residents here that I admire. They've lived in this town, and they passionately fought for unreasonable, unsensible development. I am not against development. I'm a realtor. I have a few properties, and there's nothing against. But why would destroy this little beautiful community that they have built? And this cutting the tree, there's so many issues regarding the cutting the tree, like you brought up, the erosion. We live right down there, you know. Why can't we wait? And everything is based on an environmental report that's 20 years old. And by what I understand, it wasn't even valid to begin with. I'm not an expert, so I won't say much about that. But I'm asking the committee tonight to please hold off. please take the time to investigate a little bit more and hear the rest of us before you move in with this project. I had a few more things to say, but I lost my notes. Like I said, there was nobody living in that area in 1989, and today is not 2007. I think that's about what I
Thank you very
had
much.
to say. Thank
Carolyn
you very much.
Parker?
Hi, I want to know if they are going to be posting a bond for when they take out the trees. I'm not clear that we have a system set up in case there is such erosion. You know, if there is a big storm, things can happen very, very quickly. And they're going to be pulling out these trees and thinning at a time when a storm can hit very fast. And I'm not at all convinced, having been in a mudslide where my home had 4 feet of mud in it. Rashawn, where they're going to be cutting, is just right down. Her car is right there. You know, I can just see that, let's face it, Brookfield, you know, I suppose they do as well as other big builders, but I don't think they take the best care sometimes to do things properly. You know, things are done sometimes in a slipshod way, and I want to know if there is a lot of mud slides, how are we moving in to clean up the mess as quickly as possible? I have seen things where there is an issue with Brookfield and it takes months or years for Brookfield to respond, you know, to do a cleanup. And I would like to know what kind of a if there has been a bond, if the company that's going to be pulling it out is a company that specializes in removal of eucalyptus. I just don't have any assurances. And based on what I've experienced from, you know, things that have happened up there, you know, I could see a real major slide. And I think that major slide would go into Huckleberry and down into our backyard and wipe out cars. And I can see the homeowners of the association having to start claims, you know, because we're going to have to do the cleanup, you know, while Brookfield figures out how it's going to do it. I just don't have enough assurances. And you know, I've tried to get information. I simply haven't gotten anything that makes me feel at all secure about this. Of course, I don't want to lose all those beautiful trees anyway. I mean, but in the event that we do have to lose them, I want better assurances. Thank you.
Thank you. Andre, I'm going to mispronounce your last name. Perhaps you could pronounce it for me.
Yes, I will. It's Andrei Olszewski.
Thank you.
622 Kalipe Court. I want to express my objection to the development as it is currently scheduled to proceed as a resident of that community. I want to state that despite the fact that the butterfly seems to get the top billing in all these proceedings, this is the habitat of a lot of other species. There are a lot of hawks. I've lived there for 7 years now. We see a lot of hawks. There are harriers there, raccoons, foxes. They live in that area, despite the fact that apparently, from what we heard recently, a study conducted by 2 biologists over the course of, I believe, 2 days, that located one raptor nest that is not a sufficient representation of the wildlife in that area. Again, my friends and neighbors still struggle to understand how a 1982 study still applies. Every single parameter of that development has changed. That goes for the size of the homes, the location, configuration, the resulting fragmentation of the habitats. It seems that with that amount and scope of change, a new study would be warranted. How the new development, as it is currently scheduled, will impact the habitats, the safety that Carolyn was talking about, potential landslides, and even wind patterns. There is some evidence that the current development has altered somewhat wind patterns. We witnessed some over the last 7 years, some really violent winds. I think a good example of how inadequate some of the studies may have been is the traffic study. I will quote from after the September 13th meeting report. There was an excerpt from a traffic study that stated the traffic analysis found that no new significant impact is expected in that area. As a resident on Kalipa, I can tell you that the traffic that results from the existing fraction of the new development has been a major nuisance. As the landmark residents take shortcuts through Kalipe Court, driving frequently, impatiently at speeds far exceeding the local speed limit. There already has been a significant private street, right? For the record, there has been already a significant traffic impact. So, this is a good example of how some of the reports may have been generated hurriedly. And lastly, I think everybody's concerned about the quality of the development in the sense that between 2003 and 2005, when Landmark was being built, we've experienced major problems with dust and construction traffic. A couple of months ago at the City Planning Commission meeting, I shared photographs of what our windows look like, what our cars look like. One of my cars had the paint damaged. I have a statement to that effect from my car dealer, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to be difficult. I think that the builder has some responsibility to the existing residents. I mean, we've paid some, significant money for these residences, and I think we can expect, a better, neighbor of Brookfield, however temporary that status may be.
Thank you. Ken McIntyre.
Ken McIntyre, county resident, San Bruno Mountain Watch representative. So really my question was the same one that Carolyn raised, but is this a place where we can get answers? Is a bond going to be posted? Can the city demand that a bond be posted?
Can you address the question of what bonding there is in place?
My understanding is, again, that the site activity permit was issued by the county, but there was no bonding required because with that. There is an erosion control plan, and as I indicated, we will have an inspector on site.
Thank you.
Can Clay, one of our subsequent meetings, they'll certainly be starting and stuff like that, but kind of maybe help alleviate fears to give us a synopsis of the erosion control plan or emergency response plan. If there is something that catastrophically happens, what are they going to do? I mean, certainly it's only a response to what it is that happens, but have something in place.
I'd also add that whether or not there's a bond, if there was some damage caused by the operations, there would still be the liability. And Brookfield is of the developer, and Brookfield is a solvent company, certainly. They're contributing substantial funds to the HCP, as well as they paid substantial funds in processing this project. So if there was some damage, whether there's a bond or not doesn't negate the fact that they would have a responsibility for that.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to be heard? please. Terry?
Terry O'Connell, Brisbane resident. I have some concerns about the cutting of the eucalyptus trees. The original HCP required them to thin and manage the trees, and they haven't done it. They haven't done it for almost 20 years because they didn't care enough to do it. The city didn't force them to do it. The residents didn't enforce them to do it. The county didn't enforce it to be done. And now all of a sudden, they want to come in and cut them all starting tomorrow. They've got a big rush because once they devastate the area by cutting all the trees, they're going to be able to push through their homes that they want to build there, and there isn't going to be any problem with the butterfly taking of the butterfly habitat because it's going to be gone in that area. And so they're going to be able to walk in and perhaps get an emergency grading permit to mitigate the damage for the erosion control. All that takes is a signature from a city staff member as a safety concern. So I think we're opening a floodgate by allowing the tree cutting to go forward, saying it has to be done starting tomorrow. We need it done tomorrow. No, we needed it done 20 years ago in a timely manner, in a sane and safe way where they did it step by step instead of let's go in and clear cut. And believe me, that's what they want to do, is they're going to go in, clear cut, drill out the stumps, trample everything in there. And that's not right. We should have been enforcing this a long time ago and thinning it and doing a control, habitat protection, not habitat destruction. The letter from Fish and Wildlife states, this concludes the service review of the proposal to remove eucalyptus trees from the project site. Please note, this letter does not authorize take of listed species. Are you telling me they're going to go in and clear cut 8 acres and not take a butterfly, not impact the area? That's not going to happen. We all know that's not going to happen. There are going to be species that are impacted by them going in and clear cutting. I think that I'd like to know the name of the staff member that's going to be up there tomorrow to find out what they're doing and what they're trampling. Who is going to school the people that are cutting the trees because they need to be informed of all the biological requirements and the way to do this. Is the city going to be responsible for that? Is Thomas Reed and Associates going to be responsible for that? Or is Brisbane going to be responsible for that? And I think it's really important that we know these things. And the other question I have is, when does the nesting season start for these birds? Does anyone know?
It's soon, and that's the reason that they're trying to pursue getting activating their permit.
I mean, because they're saying it must be completed before the onset of nesting season.
Correct.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on now to the report from the Emergency Services Director on the oil spill.
Just to ask, so, just real quick.
Go ahead.
One of the things that Terry O'Connell brought up, but I'm sure it probably happens, but the developer and the contractors are going to be up there. They're going to have a pre-mobilization meeting before they start.
They already did.
And they did, and they're cognizant of the area, the sensitivity, and everything like that. And so,
right, that's standard procedure, and again, that's under the county's site activity permit. All the a question came up last week with regards to making sure that the equipment that they used in spread seedlings that would create an invasive plants, and they've responded to that, and you know, that was good just to put that on the record. But all of those precautions will be taken.
Okay.
I'd like to make a statement. Yes.
You're going to make a speech or what?
No, I'm going to make a statement. I know some of the people who are in attendance here, that they have let go of some of the classes they had, some of the businesses that they had, to be here to show their serious interest on this situation that is going to be taking place tomorrow. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank you for coming, and I know we do understand and care for what you're saying, and thank you.
Now we will move on to the report from the Emergency Services Director.
Yes, sir. Good evening once again. I'm going to give a quick upbrief on the Costco Busan oil spill that happened on Wednesday, November 7th, 2008, and my remarks are going to be focused on what happened in San Mateo County and what the City of Brisbane's responses were, because we had a distinctly different situation than what was occurring with our friends to the north. So the U.S. Coast Guard sent a Channel 16 VHF alert and issued a press release regarding this matter on November 7th, 2008, and that was how we first heard about it, was over the VHF at the marina. The State OES convened a call that evening, Wednesday evening, with the local operational areas, which would be San Mateo County. The city's director of Marina Services started actively tracking the location of the spill on that morning and providing regular updates to the fire, the police, OES, and the city manager. The state OES held a 10 a.m. November 8th conference call with the local OAs, and then the San Mateo County operational area held conference calls with the local cities and towns 45 minutes later. And by early morning, again, this is November 8th, the San Mateo County OES patrol boat was in the bay off Brisbane and reporting no visible oil. Also on that day, the San Mateo County OES began twice daily conference calls with updates from the San Mateo County liaison who had been assigned to the Unified Command Post. By Friday morning, November 9th, the San Mateo County Marine Unit reports the closest portion of the spill remained off Hunters Point. Based on the southerly movement of the spill, the city requested 2,000 feet of containment boom for the lagoon and the central drainage channel that Friday morning. Contact was established with the adjacent property owners, being UPC, and logistics, receiving, deployment planning began in case the oil slick came further south and closer to shore. The city's blog on that date, this is 2 Fridays ago now, November the 9th, provided information and phone numbers for concerned citizens. The governor declared a state of emergency at noon 2 Fridays ago. No oil was reported on the shore in San Mateo County as of Friday, November the 9th. On Saturday, Oyster Point reported 1 oiled bird being received. However, the San Mateo County Sheriff's Air Squadron reported that the oil had receded north of the Bay Bridge with very little oil to the south of the Bay Bridge. On Sunday morning, November 11th, oil sheen was reported off the San Mateo County Bay coast side. By Sunday afternoon, the threat of oil contamination was identified as decreasing. The Sheriff's Squadron did report a small trace off the Brisbane Lagoon. However, the Brisbane and the Oyster Point Harbor Masters personally inspected the waters and found only a small degrading oil patch off Candlestick Point. Ongoing inspections by the local harbor masters were scheduled for the next several mornings and were continued as dictated by the situation. On Monday, November the 12th, the situation was worsening. An oil spill was sighted off Sierra Point in the shipping lanes, which are the center of the bay. On Tuesday, November the 13th, Brisbane DPW staff walked the entire coastline with Brisbane. No oil sheen, no tar balls, no impacted animals were found. And on that day, the boat patrols report that the amount on the water was only 3 to 5% of yesterday's quantity. So you can see that we had a significant amount of tidal movement going on. We had a significant amount of ebb and flood tide, significant impact on the direction of movement of the oil sheen based on the weather conditions that we were experiencing. Also, during that time period, someone from Brisbane reported and sent a picture to Environmental Health stating that oil had been found in the lagoon. The harbor master did go to the lagoon and reported that from his personal visual observation and his 20 years of experience of working around harbors and such, that there was no oil seen in the lagoon. And his note was that many well-intentioned but perhaps concerned observers who are not as familiar with the type of environments that you see out there were mistaking the usual tidal organic material for contaminants as a result of this sheen. On November the 14th, no oil was reported on any bayside cities. However, Pacifica beaches did start reporting oil in tar balls. On November the 16th, which was last Friday, the Pacifica beaches were just reopened. No conference calls were scheduled for the weekend. The situation was getting much better as far as San Mateo County was concerned. Both myself as the Director of OES and the Marina Services Director were signed up for the San Mateo County Alert Oil Spill Group. There's an electronic program system where we can all receive text messages through different means, just in case something did happen over the weekend and it was necessary to bring us back on board. I do have one note here that I want to share with the Council, is that one of the senior people over at San Mateo County Environmental Health was the Incident Commander for San Mateo County, and his email to me was, "Thanks for all of your help. The response by your city has been great. And I think that's a highlight, and I want to tell you that the person that's really directed to is Ted Warburton, the Director of Marina Services, because he was our primary point of contact. He was our eyes on the water every day that was going on, was obviously deeply involved in it because it would have impacted his marina, but he certainly had the concern of the entire city and all of our waterways in effect, and there's no doubt in my mind that he did a great job. And I will tell you the conference calls began again this morning, and they're going to continue until the situation is resolved. So with that, both Ted and I are here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you both very
Great
much.
job. I've been reading your updates, so good job, Ted.
Good job.
Taking the boat out there, but I think we have a citizen question.
Please, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Clark, I mentioned before, and I've provided images, I also have quick time-lapsed photos of the sheen that a well-intentioned person reported. And I also noticed that people continued to fish since the emergency closure was November 13th, that people continued to fish in the lagoon. I have pictures on the 14th at sunset. And I would believe, since there had not been any closure of the Fisherman's Park, that they continued beyond that period of time. I did not actually observe it. Something that is of great concern to me is that the Baylands and the Fisherman's Park does not have proper Proposition 65 signage, which would give information to people fishing and harvesting clams in the area, at least in multiple languages, that the known, I guess, cautions that are required by law. On October 24th, I observed some people who were, I wasn't certain. I thought that they were doing water testing in the leachate area of the lagoon. And I went down, tried to speak to them. They were of Asian descent, and I did not have proper language. And they were harvesting clams. And when I brought it to their, I tried the best I could to tell them that it would make them, it could make them sick. And I am peligroso. Well, that didn't work for them. And I'm trying everything I knew. And finally, I did the image of vomiting to let them know that that could have a potential risk to them. And at that point in time, they gathered the clams and left. So, I frankly, and in my letters to the City Council, and I have the pictures of the sheen that I saw, frankly do not think an adequate response was done. That, as I said earlier, that the mouth to the lagoon could very easily have had what I called car wash style absorbent material to have prevented any drop of a sheen getting in our lagoon. And I did observe dead animals, don't know the reason, and it's very well intentioned that I took pictures, but I think that the response was not adequate to the protection of the public and did not recognize the importance of our, that we did not recognize the importance of the lagoon by not putting anything there to protect it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. We'll move on now to Mayor Council matters.
Can we just have the city attorney respond to the Prop 65 signs?
Al, you ready for Prop 65?
Not really. I mean, it's, I'm not sure exactly how that would even apply here. That's, you know, a company having a certain environment for its employees, or warnings as far as certain products, whether it applies to a natural facility like that. I would have to, you know, do some research, but my initial reaction is it's not intended to apply to natural waterways like that.
But, you know,
taking this thought in a slightly different direction, rather than Prop 65, it is pretty well known that people should not eat fish out of the bay, and there's different fish you can eat more frequently. I think perch is one you might be able to eat, but it might be something for the city to consider, that we actually place some signage on the fishing pier at the Fisherman's Park, just letting people know what the recommended daily adult or monthly adult intake of various species of fish from the bay is. It's just good information for people to have.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I wouldn't eat anything out of there knowingly. You know, I mean.
But obviously, people do.
Right,
Yeah.
and they may not be getting that information, and I don't know that it would be, unless it puts us at some sort of liability, it might be good to provide that information to the people at the place where they do the fishing, because it's not something that's freely available unless you're making an effort to find out about it.
In multiple languages.
You might give that some thought.
Right. Yeah, that's something, we can certainly do on our own. That's something different than saying that it's mandated by Prop 65, which usually deals with a chemical environment that's created by the company, and we're not, creating something that's within our control or even have knowledge as to the level of risk. So.
You're right. I just think it just brought up an idea that we could provide a public service just for the general health of people using our fishing locations.
I think it's a good idea.
Unless it puts us at some sort of liability.
Maybe just a sign that says sport fishing, don't eat.
Okay.
That would be cheap.
Yeah. Straight to the point.
Now, Mayor, Council matters. Are there any subcommittee reports? Hearing none, we move to oral communications number 2. Is there anyone out there who hasn't said what they wish to say? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
poor and the gentry. Of labor and love will arise. There are no finer songs in this country. In Scotland or Ireland likewise. There's one thing more needing mention. The dances we've danced all in fun. So now that you've heard our attention, we'll play on to the beat of the drum. Thank you.